Hello, friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The name's Beauregard Thibodeau, though most folks just call me Beau. I've been hauling freight through Louisiana's backroads for the better part of 23 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these swamps had to offer. The gators sunning themselves on broken-down docks, the fog so thick you could lose yourself 10 feet from your own rig, the way the Spanish moss hangs from the cypress trees like nature's own funeral shrouds. But what happened that night on the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge changed something fundamental in me. It's been 8 months since then, and I still can't drive that stretch without my hands going white on the wheel, without checking my mirrors every few seconds like I'm being followed by something that shouldn't exist. It started simple enough, with a regular haul from Houston to Lafayette. Nothing special about the load, just construction materials, steel beams, and rebar headed for some new development near Breaux Bridge. The dispatcher at Magnolia Freight, where I'd been working for the past decade, handed me the paperwork around 4 in the afternoon. Said I could wait until morning if I wanted, but the client was paying extra for a night delivery. Times being what they were, with diesel prices eating into everyone's margins and my daughter starting college next fall, I couldn't turn down the overtime. Should have listened to that little voice in my head, the one that's kept me alive all these years on the road. Should have waited for daylight. I pulled out of the Houston yard just as the sun was starting to paint the sky orange and purple, those deep Gulf Coast colors that make you understand why people never leave this part of the country, despite the hurricanes and the heat. The traffic was thick through the city, but once I hit Interstate 10 heading east, things opened up. I've always preferred driving at night when I can help it. Less traffic, cooler temperatures, and something about the darkness that makes the miles slide by easier. You get into a rhythm with just your headlights cutting through the black, the gentle rumble of the engine, and whatever's playing on the radio. That night, I had an old Cajun station tuned in, the kind that plays Zydeco mixed with weather reports in French that my grandmère would have understood better than me. The first couple hours passed without incident. I stopped once for coffee at a truck stop near Lake Charles, one of those sprawling places with shower facilities and a diner that never closes. The coffee was bitter and strong, just the way I needed it, and the waitress, a woman named Evangeline LeBlanc according to her name tag, had that tired smile that told me she'd been on her feet too long. She asked where I was headed, and when I mentioned the Basin Bridge, something flickered across her face. Not quite fear, but something close to it. She leaned in when she brought me my change, close enough that I could smell the cigarette smoke in her hair, and said something that stuck with me even though I tried to laugh it off at the time. "You be careful out there tonight, Cher," she said in that thick Acadiana accent. "The bridge ain't right when the moon's dark. Things happen out there that don't happen in the daylight. My cousin saw something last month that turned his hair white at the temples. Won't even talk about it now, just shakes his head and changes the subject when anyone asks. I told her I'd be fine, that I'd crossed that bridge more times than I could count. But she just looked at me with those dark eyes and shook her head slowly, like she was already mourning something that hadn't happened yet. The Atchafalaya Basin Bridge is something else entirely if you've never seen it. 18 miles of elevated highway stretching across the largest wetland and swamp in the United States. During the day, you can see for miles in every direction. Nothing but water and cypress trees, and the occasional heron standing still as a statue. But at night, it's like driving through a void. The darkness swallows everything beyond your headlight beams, and all you've got is the concrete beneath your wheels and the knowledge that you're suspended 20 feet above some of the most inhospitable terrain in North America. gators, water moccasins, and things that have been living in those waters since before humans decided to build roads through them. I hit the bridge around 11:30, right when the fog was starting to roll in from the water. It wasn't the thick stuff yet, just wisps that danced across the highway like ghosts. The radio started cutting in and out, static breaking up the music until I finally just turned it off. That's when I noticed how quiet everything had gotten. Even with the windows up and the AC running, there's usually some noise, other vehicles passing, the sound of the tires on the road, something. But it was like someone had thrown a blanket over the world. Even my engine seemed muffled, like I was driving through cotton. That's when I saw the first set of lights in my mirror. Headlights coming up fast behind me. Now, I'm used to people wanting to pass. When you're hauling 40 tons of steel, you're not exactly breaking any speed records. But these lights were different. They were the wrong color, for one thing. Not the white or slightly yellow of normal headlights, but almost green, like those old glass fishing floats you sometimes find washed up on the beach. And they were set too wide apart, like whatever was driving had a front end broader than any vehicle I'd ever seen on the road. I moved over to the right lane to let them pass, but the lights just hung back there, matching my speed exactly. 60 yards behind me, never getting closer, never falling back. I tried speeding up a little, pushing the rig harder than I usually would on a bridge at night. The lights kept pace. I slowed down, dropping to barely 40 miles per hour. They slowed too. By now, my hands were starting to sweat on the wheel, and I kept checking the mirrors every few seconds. The fog was getting thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 100 feet, and those green lights just floated there in the mist like eyes watching me. Then my CB radio crackled to life. I hadn't even realized it was on. I could have sworn I'd turned it off with the regular radio. The static was different from normal interference, almost rhythmic, like breathing. Then a voice came through, but it wasn't speaking English or even French. It was something older, more guttural, words that seemed to crawl out of the speaker and hang in the air of the cab. I reached for the radio to turn it off, and that's when I saw the figure standing on the side of the bridge. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked like old work clothes, the kind you might have seen on a laborer from 50 years ago. Denim overalls, heavy boots, a shirt that might have once been white but was now stained dark with something. But it was his face that made me nearly swerve into the barrier. It was wrong, like someone had tried to reconstruct features from memory and gotten the proportions off. The eyes were too far apart, the mouth too wide, and the skin had a grayish pallor that reminded me of fish scales. As I passed, driving no more than 40 miles per hour now, he turned his head to track my movement, and I saw him raise one hand, not in greeting, but holding something, a railroad lantern, the old kerosene kind, swinging it slowly back and forth. The light it gave off was the same sickly green as the headlights behind me. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing the truck as hard as I dared in the fog, but now there were more figures. Every few hundred yards, another one standing at the edge of the bridge, each holding those lanterns, each turning to watch as I passed. Men, women, even what looked like children, all in clothes from different eras, all with those wrong faces and dead eyes. The green lights behind me had multiplied too. When I checked the mirror, I could see 3 sets now, all following at the same distance, all perfectly synchronized in their movements. The CB radio kept broadcasting that strange language, and underneath it, I started to hear other sounds. Metal groaning, water splashing, voices screaming. It sounded like a recording of an accident, played over and over again. My speedometer was reading 70 now, way too fast for the conditions, but I didn't care. I just wanted off that bridge. The fog had gotten so thick I could barely see the lane markers, and the figures on the side were just shadows now. But I knew they were there. I could feel them watching. Then everything stopped. The radio went silent. The lights behind me vanished, and the fog cleared like someone had flipped a switch. I was suddenly driving on clear highway under a star-filled sky, the bridge stretching out ahead of me exactly as it should be. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. Checked the clock on the dashboard, and my blood went cold. It was 11:33 p.m. I'd been on the bridge for exactly 3 minutes, but I'd covered almost the entire 18-mile span. That was impossible. Even at 70 miles per hour, it should have taken at least 15 minutes. I pulled off at the first exit after the bridge, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. The rest stop was well lit and had a few other trucks parked there, which made me feel a little better. I sat in my cab for a few minutes trying to make sense of what had happened, when there was a knock on my door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was another trucker, an older black man with kind eyes and a concerned expression. He asked if I was all right, said I'd pulled in looking like I'd seen a ghost. I almost laughed at that. Instead, I asked him if he'd just come across the bridge. "Which bridge?" he asked, looking confused. "The Basin Bridge," I said. "The 18-mile bridge. I just came across it." He shook his head slowly. "Son, that bridge has been closed for maintenance since 10 o'clock tonight. They're not letting anyone through until morning. I've been waiting here 3 hours for it to open back up. How did you get through?" I didn't know what to say to that. I showed him my paperwork, showed him the timestamp from the truck stop in Lake Charles. He looked at it, then at me, then back at the papers. "This says you left Lake Charles at 9:30, he said. "It's barely midnight now. You couldn't have made it here that fast taking the detour. The only way through is that bridge, and like I said, it's been closed all night." I wanted to argue, to show him something that would prove I wasn't losing my mind, but what could I say? That I'd driven across a closed bridge accompanied by ghost lights and figures from another time? That I'd covered 18 miles in 3 minutes? He must have seen something in my face because he didn't push it. Just patted me on the shoulder and told me to get some rest, that sometimes the road plays tricks on tired minds. But here's the thing that still bothers me, that makes me check my mirrors even on bright sunny days. When I went to unload the steel beams the next morning in Lafayette, the foreman commented on how cold they were. Said it was like they'd been refrigerated, which didn't make sense for steel that had been sitting in a covered trailer in Louisiana heat. And when they used the crane to lift them out, there were handprints on every single beam. Not dust or dirt that looked like handprints, but actual indentations in the metal, like someone with impossible strength had gripped them. Dozens of them, all different sizes, some so small they could have been from children. The foreman asked me what had happened, but I just shrugged and signed the paperwork. What was I going to tell him? That somewhere between Houston and Lafayette, in those 3 impossible minutes on the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge, something had been in my trailer, something that had left its mark on solid steel. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. Hell, I barely believed it myself, and I was there. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced, and I knew I'd have to cross that bridge again on the way back. The thought of it made my stomach turn to ice. I sat in that loading dock parking lot for a long time, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, trying to convince myself that darkness was just darkness, that bridges were just concrete and steel, that there was a logical explanation for everything. But even as I thought it, I could still hear that voice on the CB radio, speaking in a language that predated any map of Louisiana. And I could still see those green lights in my mirror following me across a bridge that was supposed to be closed. I sat in that parking lot until almost noon, trying to work up the courage to head back. The Lafayette heat was already brutal, making the asphalt shimmer like water, and I could feel sweat soaking through my shirt even with the AC running full blast. I kept telling myself I could take the long way around, add 3 hours to the trip and avoid the Basin Bridge altogether. But that would mean explaining to dispatch why my fuel costs were double what they should be, and I didn't have an explanation that wouldn't sound like I'd lost my mind. Besides, it was broad daylight now. Whatever I'd seen, whatever I thought I'd seen, surely it couldn't happen in the middle of the day with the sun beating down and traffic flowing normal. I pulled back onto Interstate 10 around 1 in the afternoon, heading west toward Houston. The radio was working fine, picking up a country station out of New Orleans, and I tried to lose myself in the familiar rhythms of the road. But as I got closer to the bridge, that knot in my stomach got tighter. I could see it rising up in the distance, that long stretch of concrete suspended over the swamp, and even in daylight it looked different to me now, like it was wearing a mask of normalcy over something ancient and wrong. The traffic was steady as I entered the bridge, mostly passenger cars and a few other rigs. Normal. Everything was normal. I kept telling myself that, gripping the wheel hard enough that my knuckles went white. The sun was bright overhead, reflecting off the water below in thousands of glittering points of light. I could see fishing boats down there, people going about their daily business, and it helped calm my nerves a little. Made what happened the night before seem like a bad dream, something my tired mind had conjured up from too many hours on the road. I was about halfway across when I saw him. Clement Boudreaux, according to the faded name patch on his coveralls, standing on the narrow maintenance walkway that runs along the side of the bridge. He was working on something, maybe checking the barrier or inspecting the supports, but there was something about the way he stood that made me slow down. He was too still, like those figures from the night before, and when he turned to look at my truck, I saw his face clearly in the afternoon sun. It was normal, completely normal, just a middle-aged man with sun-weathered skin and tired eyes. But he was looking at me like he recognized me, like he'd been waiting for me specifically. As I passed, driving maybe 50 miles per hour now, he raised his hand. Not in a wave, but pointing at my trailer. His mouth was moving, like he was trying to tell me something urgent, but I couldn't hear him over the engine noise. I checked my mirrors after I passed, and he was walking along the maintenance walkway following my truck, still pointing, still trying to communicate something. Then he stopped, pulled out what looked like an old flip phone, and made a call. I saw him talking animatedly, gesturing at my truck as it pulled away, and something about his urgency made that cold feeling come back. 20 minutes later, just after I'd crossed the bridge and was breathing a little easier, I saw the state police lights in my mirror. 2 cruisers, coming up fast with their sirens wailing. My first thought was that I'd been speeding, but I checked my speedometer and I was right at the limit. They pulled alongside me, and one of the officers gestured firmly for me to pull over. I found the next exit and pulled into a way station that was closed for the day, the 2 cruisers boxing me in like I was some kind of dangerous criminal. The lead officer approached my cab cautiously, hand resting on his sidearm. He was young, maybe 30, with that kind of nervous energy that comes from adrenaline. His partner, an older man with sergeant stripes, hung back by their cruiser talking into his radio. The young officer asked for my license and registration, which I handed over without argument. He looked at them, then at me, then asked me to step out of the vehicle. His voice was polite but firm, the kind that doesn't really give you a choice. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked as I climbed down from the cab. The afternoon heat hit me like a physical force, and I could feel sweat immediately start beading on my forehead. The young officer didn't answer directly, just asked me to walk to the back of my trailer with him. His partner had joined us now, and I noticed both of them kept their hands near their weapons, like they were expecting trouble. When we got to the back of the trailer, the sergeant asked me to open it. I explained that it was empty, that I'd already made my delivery in Lafayette, but he insisted. So I undid the lock and swung the doors open, expecting to show them nothing but an empty trailer. But it wasn't empty, not entirely. There was something on the floor, way in the back. something dark and wet-looking that hadn't been there when I'd unloaded that morning. The officers shined their flashlights into the trailer, and we all saw it at the same time. Mud, thick and black, the kind you find at the bottom of the swamp. It was spread across the back third of the trailer floor in a pattern that looked almost deliberate, like someone had been drawing in it. But that wasn't the worst part. There were footprints in the mud, dozens of them, going in circles like someone had been pacing. And they weren't boot prints or shoe prints. They were bare feet, with toes that seemed too long, too spread out, more like something that had spent its life climbing through marsh grass than walking on solid ground. The sergeant looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, suspicion, recognition. He asked me where the mud had come from, and I told him the truth, that the trailer had been clean when I left Lafayette. He exchanged a look with his partner, then walked a few feet away and made a phone call. I could only catch pieces of the conversation, but I heard him mention Clement Boudreau's name and something about another one. The younger officer stayed with me, and after a moment of awkward silence, he asked, "You crossed the bridge last night, didn't you? During the closure?" I started to deny it, to repeat what the trucker at the rest stop had told me about the bridge being closed, but something in his face stopped me. He looked scared, genuinely scared, and not of me. "It's okay," he said quietly, glancing over at his sergeant to make sure he wasn't listening. "It happens sometimes. People cross when they shouldn't be able to. We get calls about it every few months. Vehicles that show up on the other side when the bridge is closed for maintenance or accidents." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry despite the humidity. The officer looked around again, then stepped closer. "The bridge isn't just a bridge," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The old folks, the ones who remember when they built it back in the 70s, they tell stories about what they had to do to sink those support pillars so deep in the swamp, about the things they disturbed down there. The state likes to pretend it's just folklore, but those of us who patrol this stretch, we know better. We see things, find things, like that mud in your trailer." The sergeant came back then, ending our conversation. He handed me back my license and registration and told me I was free to go, but suggested strongly that I might want to have my trailer professionally cleaned before I used it again. "And sir," he added, as I was climbing back into my cab, "I'd recommend taking alternate routes for a while. The bridge, it's got a way of remembering people who cross at the wrong times." I wanted to ask him what he meant, wanted to demand real answers instead of cryptic warnings, but the look in his eyes stopped me. It was the same look Evangeline LeBlanc had given me at the truck stop, that mixture of pity and fear for someone who'd touched something they shouldn't have. So I just nodded, started my rig, and pulled back onto the interstate. The rest of the drive back to Houston was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, not by the police, but by something else. Every time I checked my mirrors, I expected to see those green lights, even though it was broad daylight. And the smell in my cab had changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The smell of swamp water and decay, like something had gotten into the air system. I ran the AC on max, windows down, but it wouldn't go away. When I finally got back to the yard in Houston, it was nearly dark. I'd taken my time, stopped more than necessary, trying to delay the inevitable. Because I knew I'd have to explain the delay to dispatch, the extra fuel costs, the complaints that would surely come when they found out about the police stop. But when I pulled in, the yard was strangely quiet. Usually, there'd be at least a few drivers hanging around, mechanics working late, dispatch still lit up with activity. But there was just one person waiting for me, Marcus, the night manager, standing by the gate with a clipboard and a troubled expression. "Beauregard," he said as I climbed down from the cab. "We need to talk." He led me to the dispatch office, which was empty except for us. The usual chaos of papers and coffee cups and crackling radios was replaced by an unsettling stillness. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands before looking at me. "We got a call," he said, "from someone claiming to be with the State Department of Transportation. They said you'd been involved in an incident on the Basin Bridge." "The police already checked me out," I started to say, but he held up his hand. "Not the police," he said. "This was different. They knew things, Bo. They knew about your route, your exact timing, even what you were hauling, and they said—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "They said you'd been marked. That's the exact word they used, marked." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Marked for what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Marcus shook his head. "They wouldn't say. Just said we should reassign you to different routes for a while. Keep you away from the basin area. And they said if you experienced any unusual situations, we should document everything but not report it through normal channels." He pulled out a business card and slid it across the desk to me. It was plain white with just a phone number, no name, no department, nothing. "This is who we're supposed to call if anything else happens," Marcus said. "Bo, I've been in this business 30 years and I've never gotten a call like that. What happened out there?" I wanted to tell him everything, to unload the whole insane story, but looking at his face, I realized he already knew more than he was saying. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. The company knew about the bridge, about what could happen there. They just didn't talk about it. "I need some time off," I said instead. Marcus nodded immediately, almost relieved. "Take a week," he said. "Paid. We'll call it maintenance leave." As I turned to go, he called after me. "Bo, that trailer you were pulling, we're taking it out of rotation, permanently." I looked back at him, and he just shook his head. The cleaning crew took one look at it and refused to touch it. Said there were handprints all over the inside walls. Handprints that weren't there when you left. And that mud, it's not going away. It keeps coming back no matter how much they clean. It's like it's seeping up through the floor. I left the office and walked to my personal truck, the little Chevy I drove when I wasn't hauling freight. As I pulled out of the yard, I looked back at my rig one last time. It sat there under the security lights looking normal as could be. Just another truck in a lot full of them. But I knew better now. I knew that some roads aren't just roads, and some bridges span more than just water. And I knew that whatever had marked me on that impossible crossing of the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge wasn't done with me yet. That week of paid leave was supposed to help me get my head straight, but it did the opposite. I spent the first 2 days at home in my little apartment in Pasadena, trying to convince myself that everything had a rational explanation. But at night, when I closed my eyes, I could still see those figures on the bridge, still hear that voice on the CB radio speaking in tongues that predated any map. And the smell wouldn't leave me alone. That swamp stench had followed me home, seeping into my clothes, my furniture, even my dreams. On the third night, things got worse. I woke up around 3 a.m. to find my bedroom floor covered in water. Not a leak from upstairs or a burst pipe. This was swamp water, dark and thick with sediment, pooling around my bed like it had bubbled up through the floorboards. There were things floating in it, pieces of Spanish moss, tiny shells, and what looked like scales from something I didn't want to identify. The water was warm, body temperature, and it moved wrong, swirling in patterns that had nothing to do with any current or breeze. I stood on my bed like a kid afraid of monsters, watching that water creep higher, and that's when I heard it. That same guttural language from the CB radio, coming from somewhere beneath the surface of the water. I grabbed my phone and my keys and got out of there. didn't even stop to put on shoes. I drove to an all-night diner on the other side of town and sat there drinking coffee until the sun came up, my bare feet leaving muddy prints on the clean linoleum floor. When I finally worked up the courage to go back to my apartment that afternoon, the water was gone. No stains, no moisture, no sign it had ever been there. But the smell remained, stronger than ever, and there were handprints on my bedroom window, on the outside, 3 stories up, where no one could have reached without a ladder. That's when I decided to call the number on the card Marcus had given me. It rang 3 times before someone picked up, but they didn't say hello or identify themselves, just waited in silence. "This is Beauregard Thibodeau," I said, feeling foolish. I was told to call if there were any unusual situations. There was a pause, then a woman's voice, professional but with an underlying tension. "Mr. Thibodeau, we've been expecting your call. Can you come to Baton Rouge today? There's someone who needs to speak with you." The address she gave me led to a nondescript office building downtown, the kind with mirrored windows and no signage. The lobby was empty except for a security guard who looked at my ID, made a phone call, then directed me to the 7th floor. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have, and when the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway that looked like it belonged in a hospital from the 1970s. Green walls, fluorescent lights that hummed too loud, and that institutional smell that makes you think of bad news. The woman who met me introduced herself only as Ms. Hebert. No first name, no title. She was maybe 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. She led me to a small conference room where an older man was already waiting. He was thin, almost skeletal, with skin that had that translucent quality you see in people who've been sick for a long time. But his eyes were sharp, alert, and when he looked at me, I felt like he could see straight through to my bones. "Mr. Thibodeau," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "My name is Dr. Arsenault. I run a small department within the state government that deals with, let's call them, infrastructure anomalies. The Atchafalaya Basin Bridge is one of our most active sites." He pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers and photographs, and spread them on the table. The photos were old, some dating back to the bridge's construction in the early 1970s. They showed workers, equipment, the massive concrete pillars being sunk into the swamp. But in every photo, there were anomalies. Shadows that didn't match the light sources. Figures in the background that shouldn't have been there, and in one particularly disturbing image, what looked like hands reaching up from the water toward the construction crew. "When they built the bridge," Dr. Arsenault continued, "they had to sink those pillars deeper than anywhere else in the state. The swamp floor there isn't really a floor at all. It's layers upon layers of sediment, organic matter, and things that have been settling to the bottom for thousands of years. The Kitimachus, the Homas, all the indigenous peoples who lived here before European contact, they avoided that stretch of water, called it the breathing water, the place where the old world touches ours." He pulled out another photo, this one more recent, showing a section of the bridge at night. There were lights underneath it, but not from any boats or maintenance crews. These lights were coming from the water itself, that same sickly green I'd seen in my mirrors. "Every few months," he said, "someone crosses when they shouldn't be able to. The bridge closes for maintenance or weather, but somehow certain vehicles make it through. We've tracked the pattern for 40 years now, and there's always commonalities. The drivers are always alone, always traveling at night, and always carrying something metal, steel beams, iron pipes, railway materials." "Why metal?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Dr. Arsenault and Ms. Hebert exchanged a look before he continued. "We believe the metal acts as a conductor of sorts. The indigenous peoples used to throw copper offerings into the water there, said it kept the spirits settled. When we stopped that practice and started driving thousands of tons of metal across every day, well, things became unbalanced. The bridge itself has become a kind of lightning rod for activity that should have stayed buried in the sediment. Miss Hebert spoke up then, her voice clinical, detached. What you experienced, Mr. Thibodeau, was what we call a temporal overlay. For those few minutes, you weren't just crossing the modern bridge. You were crossing all the bridges. The one that exists now, the one that existed during construction, and the one that the indigenous people spoke of in their stories, the bridge between worlds that was there long before we poured any concrete. But none of this explains why it's following me home, I said, telling them about the water in my apartment, the handprints, the continuing smell. Dr. Arsenault's expression grew more serious, if that was possible. That's the concerning part, he said. Usually the phenomena stay localized to the bridge area, but in some cases, when someone makes a crossing during a particularly active period, they can become marked, as we told your employer. You've essentially become a beacon, Mr. Thibodeau. You've crossed between worlds, and now you're visible to things that normally can't see into ours. There were things in this world, old things, things that existed before humans decided to build roads and bridges, and sometimes we accidentally built those roads and bridges right through their domain. And once you'd crossed into their territory, once they'd seen you, really seen you, there was no going back to ignorance. I took the job offer for a company based in Denver. The pay was better, the routes were simpler, and most importantly, it was 1,500 miles from the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge. Ms. Haber helped me break my lease, arranged for movers, even had my truck transported to the new terminal. It all happened so fast it felt like being in witness protection, which maybe wasn't too far from the truth. They were protecting me from something, or maybe protecting something from me. The night before I left Louisiana, I went back to that truck stop near Lake Charles, the one where Evangeline LeBlanc had warned me to be careful. She was working the late shift again, and when she saw me, her face fell. "You crossed, didn't you?" she said. Not a question, but a statement. "During the dark of the moon, when the bridge remembers what it used to be." I nodded, and she reached under the counter, pulling out a small cloth bag that smelled of herbs and something metallic. "My grand-mère made these for the ones who've been marked," she said, pressing it into my hand. "Won't fix it. Nothing can do that except time, but it might help with the dreams. And Cher," she leaned in close again, "don't ever come back. Once you've been seen by the old things in the water, they don't forget. The bridge will always recognize you now, will always try to pull you back to that in-between place. You got out once. Don't give it a second chance." I've been in Denver for 7 months now, driving routes through Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. Clean highways that cut through mountains and high desert, where the air is thin and clear, and there's nothing hiding beneath the surface except solid rock. The company here treats me well, asks no questions about why I left Louisiana so suddenly, and the other drivers have learned not to bring up my past. But the mark hasn't faded like Dr. Arsenault said it would. If anything, it's gotten stronger, and I'm starting to understand that they lied to me about it being temporary. Once you've been touched by whatever lives in those waters, you carry it with you forever. The dreams started about a month after I arrived in Denver. At first they were just fragments, flashes of green light, the sound of water lapping against concrete pillars, voices speaking in that ancient language. But gradually they became more vivid, more real. In the dreams, I'm back on the bridge, but it's not the modern bridge anymore. It's older, made of wood and rope, swaying in winds that smell of centuries of decay. The figures are there, but now I can see them clearly. They're not ghosts or spirits or whatever comforting label we might want to put on them. They're the ones who tried to cross before the bridge was ready, before the proper offerings were made, before the boundaries were established. They've been walking that bridge for longer than Louisiana has been a state, maybe longer than humans have been in this hemisphere, and they're angry that we built our concrete monument right through their eternal crossing. 3 weeks ago, the dreams changed again. Now, I'm not just observing, I'm one of them. I walk alongside the figures in their eternal procession, holding one of those green lanterns, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on my shoulders. And when I wake up, my feet are dirty with swamp mud, even though I'm 1,500 miles from the nearest bayou. My sheets are damp with brackish water that shouldn't exist in the high desert. The smell of decay follows me to work, strong enough that other drivers have started avoiding me, claiming I smell like something died in my cab. But the worst part is what happened last week. I was hauling a load of steel beams. I'd tried to avoid metal cargo, but the company insisted, and I needed the money. The route took me through a remote stretch of Highway 287 in Wyoming, the kind of place where you can drive for hours without seeing another soul. It was just past midnight when I saw it, an exact replica of the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge, stretching across a valley that should have contained nothing but sagebrush and dust. The same concrete pillars, the same green signs, even the same fog rolling in from nowhere. I tried to turn around, but my truck wouldn't respond. The steering wheel moved, but the rig kept going straight, pulled toward that impossible bridge like iron filings to a magnet. As I got closer, I could see them. All the figures from that night 7 months ago, standing along the sides, waiting for me. And in the middle of the bridge, right where the road should have been clear, stood Clement Boudreaux, not the living man who tried to warn me that day, but something wearing his shape, using his face like a mask that didn't quite fit right. "You can't run from the crossing," he said, and his voice was like water gurgling up from a deep well. "Every road leads back to the bridge. Every bridge is the same bridge. You've been between worlds, Beauregard Thibodeau, and now you belong to both and neither." He reached out with one hand, and I could see through it to the road beyond, like he was made of dirty water and old memories. The metal calls to us, it always has. The indigenous people knew this, fed us copper and gold to keep us sleeping. But you modern folk, you drive your steel carriages back and forth, wearing the boundary thin. And some of you, the unlucky ones, fall through. I wanted to argue, to deny what he was saying, but I could feel the truth of it in my bones. The truck had stopped moving, sitting in the middle of that impossible bridge, and I could feel something pulling at me, trying to drag me out of the cab and into that eternal procession. The figures were pressing closer now, their faces becoming clearer. I recognized some of them, drivers from the old photos Dr. Arsenault had shown me, workers from the bridge construction, even older faces that might have been French colonists or Spanish explorers. All of them had crossed at the wrong time, in the wrong way, and now they were part of the bridge itself, human pillars holding up a structure that existed in more than 3 dimensions. That's when I remembered the bag Evangeline LeBlanc had given me, the one from her grand-mère. I'd kept it in my jacket pocket all these months, a small comfort against the dreams. I pulled it out now, and immediately the figures stepped back. The bag was hot to the touch, almost burning, and when I opened it I found a collection of items that shouldn't have meant anything but somehow did. Copper coins green with age, a small piece of iron that looked like it had been part of a railroad spike, fragments of shell that could only have come from the deep bayou, and a folded piece of paper with words written in Creole that I couldn't read, but somehow understood. I spoke those words aloud, my tongue struggling with sounds it had never made before, and the bridge began to shake. not like an earthquake, but like something breathing, something waking up after a long sleep. The figures scattered, fleeing back to whatever realm they normally inhabited, and Clement Boudreaux's shape dissolved like sugar in rain. The impossible bridge started to fade, becoming transparent, and I gunned the engine, racing through it before it disappeared completely. I burst out the other side onto normal Wyoming highway, my truck's engine screaming from the strain, and when I looked back, there was nothing but empty road and star-filled sky. I pulled over at the next rest stop, hands shaking so badly I could barely put the truck in park. The steel beams in my trailer were covered in handprints again, but this time they were different. Instead of indentations pressed into the metal, these were raised, like something underneath had tried to push its way out. And there was writing scratched into the steel, that same ancient language from the CB radio, covering every beam from end to end. I took photos of it all, planning to send them to Dr. Arsenault, but when I looked at them later, the images showed nothing but normal, unmarked steel. I delivered the load the next morning to a construction site in Cheyenne. The foreman complained that the beams were ice cold and wouldn't warm up no matter how long they sat in the sun. A week later, I heard that the building they were constructing had to be demolished after workers reported seeing figures walking through the walls, shadows that moved without sources, and voices speaking in languages that predated any human settlement in Wyoming. The company hushed it up, but word spreads among drivers. Now, nobody will haul steel on the routes I take. They all know I'm marked, that I carry the bridge with me wherever I go. Dr. Arsenault finally returned my calls last night. He sounded older, tired, like the weight of keeping these secrets had aged him years in just months. "It's spreading," he said without preamble. "The phenomenon isn't staying localized anymore. We've had reports from Texas, Mississippi, Arkansas. Bridges that shouldn't exist appearing on highways, drivers crossing when the roads are closed, cargo arriving with impossible modifications. And they all trace back to that night you crossed." "What do you mean, trace back to me?" I demanded. But I already knew the answer. Somehow, when I'd made that impossible crossing, I'd torn something, weakened a boundary that had been holding for decades. The bridge had recognized something in me, some quality that made me a perfect conductor for whatever energy flowed through those waters, and now it was using me to expand its reach. "We need you to come back," Dr. Arsenault said. "To Louisiana, to the bridge. You're the only one who's crossed and retained enough of yourself to talk about it coherently. The others, they're either gone completely or so changed they can't function in normal society. We think if you cross again, intentionally this time, with the proper preparations, we might be able to seal the breach." The proper preparations. I wanted to laugh at that. What preparation could there be for deliberately driving into a nightmare? But I knew I would go. Not because I trusted Dr. Arsenault or his mysterious department, but because I could feel the pull of the bridge getting stronger every day. It was calling me back, and eventually, whether I wanted to or not, I would answer. Every road I drove seemed to curve toward Louisiana. Every map I looked at showed the Atchafalaya Basin at its center, and every time I closed my eyes, I could hear those voices chanting in the ancient tongue, welcoming me home. I'm writing this all down because I leave for Louisiana tomorrow, and I don't think I'm coming back. Not as myself, anyway. The mark hasn't faded. It's become part of me, written into my DNA, or my soul, or whatever you want to call the thing that makes us human. I've become a bridge myself, a living connection between the world we know and the world that exists in the spaces between steel and water, concrete and swamp. Maybe that's what the bridge wanted all along, not just to trap random drivers, but to create ambassadors, translators who could speak both languages, walk both roads. Clement Boudreaux visited me in a dream last night. Not the thing that wore his face on the impossible bridge, but the real man, or what was left of him. He told me he'd been trying to warn drivers for 15 years, ever since his own crossing went wrong. He'd been working on the bridge that day I saw him, not for the highway department, but for something older, trying to maintain the barriers, to reinforce the boundaries. But every time someone crossed during the wrong alignment, the barriers got weaker, and he got pulled a little further into that other realm. "The bridge ain't evil," he said in that thick Cajun accent that sounded like home. "It's just old, older than good or evil, older than human understanding. It's a crossing that existed before there was water there, before there was land, when this whole world was something else entirely. We just built our bridge on top of it, like building a house on a graveyard and wondering why there's knocking in the walls." He told me what I need to do when I get there. It's not about sealing the breach. That's impossible now. It's about accepting my role as a permanent part of the crossing, a human pillar to match the concrete ones, holding up both bridges simultaneously. I'll still exist in this world, still drive my routes, still deliver my cargo, but I'll also exist in that other place, helping others cross safely, making sure they don't get lost between worlds like so many before them. It's not the life I would have chosen, but maybe choice is an illusion anyway. Maybe from the moment I took that night haul from Houston to Lafayette, this was always going to be the destination. The road doesn't care about our plans or our fears. It just goes where it needs to go, and we follow or we get left behind. And some of us, the marked ones, we become the road itself, stretching between places that shouldn't connect but do, carrying others across boundaries they don't even know exist. Tomorrow, I'll cross the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge one last time as just Beauregard Thibodeau, trucker from Texas. When I come out the other side, if I come out at all, I'll be something else. Something that belongs to both the daylight world of concrete and steel and the older world of water and whispers. The bridge will have its guardian, and maybe, just maybe, the crossings will become safer for the drivers who come after me. But if you're reading this, and you find yourself driving through Louisiana late at night, and you see a sign for the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge when your GPS says it should be miles away, don't follow it. Turn around, take the long way, add hours to your journey. Because the bridge is always hungry for new pillars, always looking for souls who can exist in both worlds at once. And once it marks you, once you've crossed when the boundaries are thin, there's no going back to the simple life of highways and truck stops and delivery schedules. The water remembers everything that's ever passed through it. The steel remembers every hand that's shaped it. And the bridge, the eternal bridge that exists in all times and all places simultaneously, remembers everyone who's ever crossed. We become part of its structure, human consciousness merged with concrete and metal, holding up a pathway between worlds that should never have been connected, but now can never be separated. I can hear them calling now, even here in Denver, 1,500 miles from the bayou. The voices of all the crossers, all the marked ones, all the pillars that hold up the impossible bridge. They're saying it's time to come home, time to take my place in the eternal procession. And despite everything, despite the fear and the horror and the knowledge of what I'm about to become, part of me is eager to answer. Because once you've seen both worlds, living in just one feels like being half awake, half alive, half real. The road calls, and I must answer. The bridge waits, and I must cross. And somewhere in that space between Louisiana swamp water and Wyoming highway dust, between modern steel and ancient offerings, between the world we built and the world we built upon, I'll find my place. Not as Beauregard Thibodeau, trucker, but as something more and less than human. a permanent part of the infrastructure that connects realities that we're never meant to touch. This is my last entry as myself. If someone finds this, if Dr. Arsenault's department catalogs it with all their other evidence of things that shouldn't exist, know that I went willingly in the end. The mark didn't fade because it was never meant to. Some of us are chosen to be bridges ourselves, to stand with one foot in each world, making sure the crossing remains possible but not too easy, open but not too wide. It's a sacrifice, but also an honor in its way. We become part of something larger than ourselves, larger than human understanding, as essential to the structure of reality as the concrete pillars that hold up the highway. The sun is setting now, painting the mountains the same orange and purple I saw that last normal evening leaving Houston. Tomorrow, I'll drive through the night, through Texas, and into Louisiana, toward a bridge that exists in more places than it should. And when I cross, when I finally accept what I've become, the voices will stop calling, the dreams will stop pulling, and I'll be home in a way I never was before. Not the home we choose, but the home that chooses us, that claims us, that makes us part of itself forever. The Atchafalaya Basin Bridge is waiting. It's been waiting for 7 months, patient as only ancient things can be. And I'm ready now. Ready to stop running. Ready to stop pretending I can escape what I've become. The crossing changed me, marked me, made me into something that belongs to both worlds and neither. And tomorrow I'll complete the transformation, become the guardian the bridge needs, the translator between realities, the human pillar that helps hold up a structure that exists in dimensions we don't have names for. If you're a trucker reading this, if you drive these long, lonely roads in the deep of night, remember, some bridges are more than bridges. Some roads lead to more than destinations, and some crossings can't be undone. Drive safe, stay in your own world, and whatever you do, don't cross the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge when the moon is dark and the fog is rising. Because once you've crossed between worlds, once you've been seen by the things that live in the spaces between, you can never truly come back. The road goes on forever, but some of us become the road itself. This is my fate, my burden, my transformation. And somewhere in the swamps of Louisiana, where the water is older than memory and the boundaries are thinner than paper, the bridge is waiting to welcome me home. My name is Jedediah Fontenot, and I've been driving 18-wheelers through the Deep South for nearly 19 years. Started when I was 22, fresh out of a failed attempt at college, thinking I'd do it for a year or two until I figured out what I really wanted. But the road has a way of claiming you, making you forget there was ever any other life you might have lived. I've hauled everything from livestock to hazardous materials, driven through hurricanes and ice storms, seen the sun rise over the Rockies and set over the Gulf. But nothing in all those years prepared me for what happened that October night on the back roads between Arnaudville and Grand Coteau, in the heart of Cajun country where the old ways still hold sway, and some families keep secrets that go back generations. It was supposed to be a milk run, the kind of easy haul that barely registers in your memory after a few days. I was carrying a load of industrial refrigeration units from a warehouse in Shreveport down to a new seafood processing plant near Del Cambre. The normal route would have taken me straight down I-49 to Lafayette, then over to the coast. But there was major construction near Opelousas that had traffic backed up for miles. Dispatch suggested I take the back roads through St. Landry Parish. Said it would add maybe 30 minutes, but save me from sitting in traffic for hours. I should have just waited it out. Should have sat in that traffic until my eyes bled from staring at taillights. But I was eager to get the run done. Had plans to take a few days off, maybe drive up to see my sister in Memphis. so I took the detour. The first sign something was wrong came about an hour after I left the interstate. The GPS started acting strange, not losing signal exactly, but showing my position jumping around, like I was teleporting between roads that didn't connect. 1 second I was on Highway 103, the next it showed me 5 miles away on some parish road I'd never heard of. The screen would flicker, the voice would cut out mid-instruction, then come back speaking what sounded like French, except not quite the French I remembered from high school. This was older, thicker, full of words that seemed to catch in the speaker's throat like they were afraid to let them fully escape. I tried to reset the unit, but it wouldn't respond to any inputs. The screen just kept showing this maze of roads that didn't match any map of Louisiana I'd ever seen. Roads with names like Chemin des Ombres Perdus and Rue de la Dernière Prière, which even with my limited French I could tell meant something about lost shadows and last prayers. Not exactly comforting when you're alone in a 40-ton rig on roads barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. But I kept driving, figuring I'd eventually hit a main road or see a sign for something familiar. The cab was getting cold, despite the heater running full blast, and there was this smell seeping in through the vents, like wet earth and something else, something sweet and rotten like fruit that's been left to ferment in the sun. The engine started missing about 20 minutes later. Just little stutters at first, barely noticeable unless you'd been driving the same rig for 3 years and knew every sound it made. Then it got worse, violent coughs that made the whole truck shudder. I checked the gauges. Everything looked normal. Oil pressure fine, temperature right where it should be, plenty of fuel. But the engine kept struggling, like something was blocking the air intake or the fuel lines were full of syrup. I knew I needed to pull over, but the road had narrowed to barely more than a single lane, lined on both sides by massive oak trees whose branches formed a tunnel overhead, blocking out the stars and most of the moon. Then it died completely. No warning, no final gasp, just sudden silence except for the sound of the tires rolling to a stop on the gravel. The lights went out too. Headlights, dash lights, even the little LED on my phone charger. Complete electrical failure, which shouldn't have been possible. Trucks like mine have backup systems, redundancies built into the electrical system specifically to prevent total blackouts. But there I was, sitting in perfect darkness in the middle of nowhere with a dead truck and no idea exactly where I was. I sat there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, trying not to panic. I'd been in bad situations before. Had a transmission blow out in the middle of the Mojave once. Had to wait 18 hours for a tow in 110-degree heat. This was just another mechanical failure, another story to tell at truck stops. But something about the darkness here felt different. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was like the darkness had weight, substance, like it was pressing against the windows trying to get in. And the silence was wrong too. Louisiana nights are never quiet. There's always crickets, frogs, nightbirds, something. But this was the kind of silence you only get in places where nothing living wants to make a sound. I found my flashlight in the side compartment, one of those heavy mag lights that doubles as a club if necessary. The beam seemed weak when I turned it on, like the darkness was eating the light before it could get very far. I climbed down from the cab, and the moment my boots hit the ground, I knew I wasn't alone. It wasn't anything I could see or hear, just that primitive awareness that comes from millions of years of evolution. That feeling that tells you you're being watched by something that might consider you prey. The road under my feet wasn't gravel anymore. It was dirt, packed hard by years of use, but I could have sworn it had been gravel when I was driving on it. The trees seemed closer too, their branches lower, creating a ceiling maybe 12 feet overhead. Spanish moss hung down in thick curtains, moving slightly despite the complete absence of wind. I did a quick walk around the truck, checking for obvious problems, but everything looked fine externally. No flat tires, no visible leaks, nothing that would explain the sudden, complete failure. That's when I heard the footsteps. Soft, measured, coming from somewhere behind the trailer. Not trying to be stealthy, just walking with the confidence of someone who belonged there. I swung the flashlight around and the beam caught a figure emerging from the tree line. It was a man, maybe 60 years old, wearing overalls and a plaid shirt that had seen better days. His face was deeply lined, weathered by decades of sun and hard work, and his eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost white in the flashlight's beam. He raised one hand in greeting, and I noticed his fingers were stained dark with what looked like oil, or maybe blood. "Engine trouble?" he asked, and his accent was thick Cajun, the kind you don't hear much anymore except in the really remote parts of the parishes. "That happens sometimes on this road. The trucks, they don't like it here. Too much history in the ground, too much iron in the earth. Messes with the electronics." He pronounced it electronics, breaking it into distinct syllables like it was a foreign word he'd learned phonetically. "Yeah, complete electrical failure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know where I could find a tow truck? Or maybe a mechanic who works nights?" The old man smiled, but it didn't reach those pale eyes. "Oh, Cher, ain't no tow trucks coming out here at night. Ain't no mechanics neither. But you and Luck, my family, we live just up the road a piece. We can give you a place to stay tonight, get you sorted in the morning when the sun comes back." Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to go with this man. There was something off about him, about this whole situation. But what choice did I have? I couldn't stay with the truck all night. Not with no heat, no communication, no way to call for help. My phone was as dead as everything else electronic. Wouldn't even turn on. And the darkness around us seemed to be getting thicker, more oppressive, like it was slowly crushing the small sphere of light from my flashlight. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I should probably stay with my cargo, company policy and all that." The old man's smile widened, showing teeth that were too white, too straight for someone his age living in rural Louisiana. "Oh, your cargo be fine. Ain't nobody out here but us, and we don't take what ain't offered freely. Besides," he gestured at the darkness around us, "you don't want to be alone out here when the moon finishes setting. That's when the old things wake up, the things that was here before the roads, before the towns, before the people came with their crosses and their iron." Something about the way he said iron made me look back at my truck, at all that metal sitting useless in the dark. "What do you mean, old things?" I asked, but he was already walking away, heading down the road in the opposite direction from where I'd been driving. "Come on, Cher," he called back over his shoulder. "My daughter, she got dinner on the stove, couillon to waste good food, and my family, they want to meet you. We don't get visitors much, especially not ones who find this road." I should have stayed with the truck. Should have locked myself in the cab and waited for dawn, no matter how cold it got, no matter what sounds I heard in the darkness. But I followed him. Grabbed my jacket and my phone, useless as it was, and followed that old man down a dirt road that shouldn't have existed, toward a house that was about to show me that some southern hospitality comes with a price that can't be paid in money. The walk was longer than it should have been. The old man said it was just up the road, but we must have walked for 20 minutes through that tunnel of trees, our footsteps the only sound except for this weird humming the old man was doing under his breath. It wasn't quite singing, wasn't quite talking, just this continuous drone that seemed to vibrate in my chest. The flashlight beam kept getting weaker, or maybe the darkness was getting stronger. By the time we finally saw lights ahead, I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. The house materialized out of the darkness like something from a dream. It was old, probably antebellum, with those wraparound porches you see in movies about the old South. But where those movie houses are all white columns and genteel decay, this one was different. The wood was dark, almost black, like it had been soaked in oil or treated with something that preserved it beyond the normal lifespan of wood. The windows glowed with a warm yellow light that seemed inviting until you noticed it didn't behave like normal light. It didn't spill out onto the porch or illuminate the yard. It just stayed contained within the windows, like each pane of glass was holding a piece of sunset prisoner. "Armand," a voice called from inside. "Dat you? You found him?" The old man, Armand apparently, called back in rapid Cajun French that I couldn't follow. A woman appeared in the doorway, younger than Armand, but with the same pale eyes, the same too perfect teeth. She was wearing a simple house dress that could have been from any era in the last 100 years, and her hair was pulled back in a style I'd only seen in old photographs. "Welcome," she said, her accent lighter than Armand's but still noticeable. "I'm Marie Bro, Armand's wife. You must be cold. Come in, come in. Celestine has made gumbo." The inside of the house was worse than the outside. Not because it was decrepit or obviously sinister, but because it was too perfect. Everything was clean, pristine, like it had been frozen in time and carefully maintained. The furniture looked handmade, carved from that same dark wood as the house's exterior. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all in matching frames, showing what must have been generations of the Bro family. But something was wrong with the pictures. The faces were all similar, too similar, like the same people had been photographed over and over across decades. And their eyes, all of them had those same pale, almost colorless eyes. A younger woman emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen, carrying a tray with bowls of something that smelled incredible. This must have been Celestine, the daughter Armand had mentioned. She looked maybe 25, with long dark hair and those same pale eyes, but on her they were somehow more unsettling. When she looked at me, I felt like she was seeing through me, into me, cataloging everything I was and everything I might be useful for. "You must be hungry," she said, setting a bowl in front of me. The smell hit me full force, rich, spicy, perfect gumbo that made my stomach clench with sudden hunger. "Eat, you'll need your strength." There was something odd about the way she said it, like she was talking about more than just recovering from a long drive. But I was hungry, and the food smelled amazing, and what harm could there be in a bowl of gumbo? I took a bite, and it was the best thing I'd ever tasted. Rich and complex, with flavors I couldn't identify, meat so tender it fell apart on my tongue. But as I ate, I noticed the family wasn't eating. They were all watching me, Armand, Marie, Celestine, and now 2 younger men who had appeared from somewhere deeper in the house. All of them with those pale eyes, all of them smiling those too perfect smiles, all of them absolutely still, except for the synchronized rise and fall of their breathing. "It's good, yes?" Marie asked, and I nodded, unable to stop eating even though something in the back of my mind was screaming that this was wrong, that I needed to leave immediately. "Old recipe," she continued, "passed down through the family for generations. Very special ingredients, very particular in what we use." The room was getting warmer, or maybe I was. Sweat started beading on my forehead, and the edges of my vision began to blur. The last thing I clearly remember from that first night was Celestine leaning over me, her face inches from mine, those pale eyes filling my entire field of vision. "Don't fight it," she whispered. "It's easier if you don't fight. And we promise we'll take good care of your body while you're gone." I woke up in stages, like climbing up from the bottom of a deep well. First came the awareness of lying on something soft, A bed, though not my own. Then the smells. Lavender and something medicinal. Old wood and dust. And underneath it all that same sweet rot from the road. My head felt like it had been stuffed with cotton, and my mouth tasted like copper and ash. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I found myself in a small room with walls covered in that same dark wood. No windows, just a single oil lamp burning on a dresser that looked hand-carved from cypress. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't respond properly. Not paralyzed exactly, but sluggish, like all my nerves were firing through molasses. That's when I noticed the markings on the walls. At first, I thought they were just patterns in the wood grain, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized they were deliberate. Symbols carved deep into the wood, filled with something dark that might have been wax or blood. They seemed to move in the lamplight, writhing like living things, and looking at them too long made my head spin worse than it already was. The door opened without a sound, and Celestine entered carrying a tray with a glass of water and what looked like more food. She'd changed clothes, now wearing a white dress that looked ancient, with high collar and long sleeves despite the warmth of the house. Her pale eyes studied me with an intensity that made me want to look away, but I couldn't. There was something hypnotic about them, something that held my gaze even as every instinct screamed at me to run. "You're awake," she said, setting the tray on the nightstand. "Good. Papa was worried we'd given you too much. Sometimes outsiders, their bodies can't handle the old recipes the way we can. But you're strong. I could tell that right away. You'll last longer than the others." "Others?" My voice came out as a croak, and she handed me the water. I wanted to refuse it, but my throat felt like sandpaper, and before I could stop myself, I was drinking deeply. The water tasted wrong, metallic and thick, with an aftertaste like pond scum. But I couldn't stop drinking until the glass was empty. "Oh yes," she said, taking the glass back. "We get visitors sometimes. Lost travelers who find the old road when the conditions are right. Papa says it only appears to certain people, those with the right kind of energy, the right kind of essence. The road chooses them, brings them to us, and we take care of them." She sat on the edge of the bed, and I tried to move away, but my body still wouldn't cooperate. She reached out and placed a hand on my forehead, and her skin was cold, so cold it burned. "Your truck," she said, "it's already gone, dissolved back into the iron and oil it came from. The road takes everything eventually, metal, rubber, glass, breaks it all down and feeds it to the earth. But people, living people, we're different. We don't dissolve, we transform." "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask, though part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. Celestine smiled, and for a moment, her face seemed to flicker, showing something else underneath. Something older, hungrier, with too many teeth and skin like bark. "My family has been here for 300 years, she said. "Maybe more. Time works different in the deep parishes, where the swamp meets the old forest and the barriers between worlds get thin. We made a deal, long before Louisiana was American, before it was French, back when the native peoples still knew which spirits to feed and which to avoid. We feed the road, and the road keeps us alive, keeps us young, keeps us strong." She stood up and walked to the wall with the carved symbols, running her fingers along them like she was reading Braille. "These markings, they're not decoration. They're contracts, agreements written in the old language. Each one represents a person who's passed through our house, given themselves to the road. Their bodies stay here working our fields, maintaining our home, while their spirits become part of the infrastructure, you might say, part of the network of roads that exists underneath the roads everyone else sees." "You're insane," I said, trying again to sit up. This time, I managed it, though the effort left me gasping. There's no such thing as magic roads and spirit contracts. You drugged me with something in that food, and now you're trying to scare me with ghost stories. Celestine laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. Ghost stories. If only it were that simple. Tell me, Jedediah. Yes, I know your name. The road told us everything about you. Have you looked outside yet? Have you seen what's become of the world since you entered our house? She walked to what I now realized was a window, hidden behind a heavy curtain. When she pulled it aside, I expected to see daylight, or at least the yard I'd walked through to get to the house. Instead, there was nothing. Not darkness, not light, just a gray void that hurt to look at, like my eyes couldn't quite focus on the absence of everything. We're between, she said simply. Between your world and the old world. Between the roads you know and the roads that have always been. This house exists in both places simultaneously. A bridge between realities. When you ate our food, you began the transition. Your body is here, but your spirit is already starting to separate, to prepare for its new purpose. I forced myself to stand, using the wall for support. The cymbals under my hand felt warm, pulsing with a rhythm that might have been a heartbeat. I'm leaving, I said, though I had no idea how. You can't keep me here. Can't we? Armand's voice came from the doorway. He looked different now, taller, straighter, like the elderly man I'd met on the road had been a disguise he no longer needed to maintain. You already tried to leave, Cher. 3 times in your sleep, you got up and walked to the door. But you always came back. The house wouldn't let you go. Or maybe you wouldn't let yourself go. Hard to tell the difference after a while. 3 times? I had no memory of trying to leave. No memory of anything between eating the gumbo and waking up in this room. How long have I been here? Time, Marie said, appearing beside her husband. Such a human concept. You've been here an hour, a day, a week. All true, all false. In your world, your truck has been missing for 3 days. They're searching for you, putting up posters, calling your family. In our world, you've been here since before the house was built, and you'll be here long after it crumbles. Time is just another road, and we know all the shortcuts. This had to be a hallucination. Maybe I'd crashed the truck, hit my head, and this was all some dying dream as I bled out in the cab. But it felt too real, too detailed. The way the air tasted, the way the symbols on the walls seemed to whisper in languages I didn't understand. The way my body was simultaneously heavy and weightless, like I was underwater and floating at the same time. What do you want from me? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Armand stepped into the room, and I could see now that his overalls were covered in stains that weren't oil or blood, but something else. Something that seemed to move and shift in the lamplight. We want what the road wants, he said. Your essence, your energy, your years. You'll work our fields, tend our house, help us maintain the barrier between worlds. And in exchange, you'll live forever, or at least as long as the roads exist. It's not a bad deal when you think about it. Better than dying in a truck crash, better than growing old and forgotten in some nursing home. And if I refuse, I asked, though even as I said it I could feel something inside me yielding, accepting, like part of me had already agreed to their terms. Celestine moved closer and I could smell her perfume. Not lavender, I realized, but something else. Something that smelled like the air before a thunderstorm. You can't refuse, she said softly. The moment you ate our food, the contract was sealed. But we're not cruel. We'll make the transition as easy as possible. Some fight it, and they suffer. Others accept it, and they find peace. A few even find happiness, eventually. There's a certain freedom in knowing your purpose, in being part of something larger than yourself. She reached out and took my hand, and her touch sent ice through my veins. But underneath the cold, there was something else. A warmth, a connection, a feeling of belonging I'd never experienced before. For a moment I could see through her eyes, see myself as she saw me, not as Jedediah Fontenot, trucker from Texas, but as energy, potential, a collection of years and experiences that could be harvested and redistributed. I have a family, I said weakly, a sister in Memphis, friends, a life. Had, Marie corrected gently. You had those things, now you have us. We're your family now, and we'll take care of you the way we've taken care of all the others. Come, let me show you. She led me out of the room, my legs moving almost against my will. The hallway beyond was longer than the house should have been able to contain, lined with doors that all looked identical. Behind some, I could hear movement, footsteps, whispers, sometimes crying. Marie opened one seemingly at random, revealing a room identical to the one I'd woken up in. But this one had an occupant, a man in his 30s wearing a trucking company uniform from what looked like the 1980s. He was sitting on the bed, staring at the wall, his lips moving in what might have been prayer or madness. When he saw us, his eyes widened with something that might have been hope or fear. "New one?" he asked, his voice rusty from disuse. "How long?" Marie answered in that rapid Cajun French, and the man laughed, a broken sound that made my skin crawl. 30 years, he said to me. I've been here 30 years, or 30 minutes, or 30 centuries. Hard to tell anymore, but the work's not bad, once you get used to it. And the dreams are worth it. Dreams? I asked, but Marie was already closing the door, leading me further down the hallway. We passed more doors, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Behind each one, she explained, was someone like me. Someone who'd found the road, eaten the food, become part of the family's collection. Truckers, mostly, but also traveling salesmen, lost tourists, even a few locals who'd stumbled onto the property at the wrong time. We don't take everyone, she said, as if this was supposed to be comforting. Only those the road chooses. Those with the right kind of energy. You should feel honored. Out of all the people driving those highways, the road chose you. It saw something special in you, something worth preserving. We came to a door at the end of the hallway, larger than the others, made of a different wood that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Marie produced a key from somewhere in her dress, an ancient thing made of what looked like bone, and unlocked it. The room beyond was vast, impossible, bigger than the entire house should have been. It was filled with machinery that hurt to look at, gears and pistons and tubes that seemed to be made of solidified shadow, all connected to a central apparatus that looked like a cross between an engine and an altar. "This is the heart," Armand said, appearing beside us. "The engine that keeps everything running. Every person we collect, their energy feeds into this, and this feeds into the roads. Not just the physical roads, but the conceptual ones, the paths between places, between times, between realities. We're maintenance workers, you might say, keeping the infrastructure of existence properly fueled." I watched in horror as Celestine approached the machine and placed her hand on what looked like a control panel made of carved wood and exposed nerves. The machine responded to her touch, parts of it lighting up with that same sickly green light I'd seen in the lamp. And for a moment I could feel it, the vast network of roads stretching across not just Louisiana, not just America, but across dimensions I couldn't name or comprehend. All of them hungry, all of them feeding on the energy of travelers, all of them maintained by families like the Bro, who'd made deals with forces older than human civilization. "You're taking this better than most," Celestine observed, watching my face as I tried to process what I was seeing. Usually, there's more screaming by now, more denial, more bargaining with God. She moved around the machine with a familiarity that suggested she'd been doing this for decades, maybe centuries. Her fingers traced patterns in the air that left brief after-images, like sparklers in the dark. But you're different, I can feel it. You've always known, haven't you, that there was something wrong with the world, something hiding just beneath the surface of what everyone calls reality. She was right, and I hated that she was right. All those years on the road, I'd felt it. The wrongness in certain places, the way some stretches of highway felt older than they should, the way some truck stops seemed to exist in pockets outside normal time. I'd dismissed it as road hypnosis, as tired imagination, as anything but what it actually was. But deep down, I'd known. Maybe that's why the road had chosen me. Maybe I'd been marked for this long before my truck broke down on that impossible dirt road. "Show him the others," Armand said, his voice carrying a weight of authority that hadn't been there before. "Show him what he'll become. Better he knows now than discovers it piece by piece over the years." Marie nodded and led me to another section of that impossible room, where the walls were lined with what looked like glass cases, each one containing a figure that might have been human once. They weren't dead. I could see them breathing, see their eyes tracking our movement, but they weren't alive either, not in any way that mattered. Their skin had taken on the texture of the dark wood that made up the house. Their fingers had grown long and root-like, and their faces were peaceful, serene even, like they'd finally found what they'd been searching for their whole lives. Some were dressed in clothes from different eras, a woman in a 1950s dress, a man in what looked like Civil War-era clothing, children in outfits I couldn't place in time. "The transformation takes time," Marie explained, her voice taking on the tone of a museum guide. "Years, decades sometimes, depending on how much you fight it. These ones accepted their fate early. They understood that becoming part of the infrastructure was an honor, not a curse. They feed the roads with their dreams now, their memories, their essence flowing through the network like blood through veins." I approached one of the cases, drawn by something I couldn't name. Inside was a man who looked familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen him. He was wearing a trucker's uniform with the company logo I recognized. Magnolia Freight, same company that employed Beauregard Thibodeau, whose story I'd heard whispered about at truck stops for months. His eyes met mine, and his lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass. But I could read them. "Run, while you still can." "That's Douglas," Celestine said, appearing at my elbow. "He came to us about 6 months ago, fought harder than most. Broke 3 windows, set fire to the kitchen, even managed to make it all the way to where the road meets the highway before we brought him back. But in the end, they all come back. The transformation has already begun, you see. From the moment you eat our food, you're part of the family, part of the house, part of the road." 6 months. I looked at the man again. His skin was almost entirely wood now. His fingers had fused together into club-like appendages, and there were things growing from his scalp that might have been hair or might have been Spanish moss. He looks like he's been here for decades. "Time moves differently once the transformation begins," Armand said. "A day can be a year can be a minute. The road doesn't care about human concepts of time. It only cares about the energy, the essence, the fuel that keeps it running." I turned away from the cases, unable to look at what I was apparently destined to become. The machine in the center of the room was humming louder now, and I could feel it pulling at something inside me, something vital and irreplaceable. "There has to be a way out," I said, though even as I spoke, I could feel the futility of it. People can't just disappear. There are laws, investigations, someone will come looking. Marie laughed, but there was sadness in it. Oh, Cher, they do come looking. Police, FBI, even some folks from agencies that don't officially exist. But they never find us. How could they? We don't exist in their world, not really. This house, this road, it's all between spaces, between moments. We're in the gaps of reality, the places maps don't show because cartographers' minds won't let them see. Your truck, it's already been found, abandoned on a perfectly normal stretch of Highway 103. No sign of struggle, no sign of you, just another trucker who walked away from his life. They'll assume you had a breakdown, Celestine added. Stress of the job, too many lonely hours on the road. Happens all the time. Your family will mourn, your company will replace you, and life will go on. No one will ever know you're here. Feeding the roads with your dreams, keeping the infrastructure running for all those other travelers who pass overhead, never knowing what's beneath their wheels. The weight of it all was crushing. Not just the loss of my life, my freedom, but the knowledge that this had been happening for generations, maybe longer. How many missing truckers, traveling salesmen, lost tourists had ended up here or in places like this? How many families were there like the bro, maintaining these nightmare engines that kept reality from collapsing in on itself? Or was that just another lie? Another way to make the victims feel like their sacrifice meant something. I want to see outside, I said suddenly. The real outside, not that gray void. I want to see the road where my truck broke down. Armand and Marie exchanged glances and Celestine shook her head. That's not wise, she said. Once you've seen the truth of where we are, going back becomes impossible. The cognitive dissonance alone could shatter your mind. I'll take the risk, I said, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. Maybe I just needed to confirm that the world I knew still existed somewhere, even if I could never return to it. After a long moment, Armand nodded. Show him, he said to Celestine. He's strong enough, and perhaps seeing will help him accept. Celestine led me back through the impossible hallways, past all those doors hiding centuries of victims, to what looked like a different entrance than the one I'd come through originally. This door was older, made of wood so ancient it had turned to something almost like stone. She produced another bone key and unlocked it, pushing it open to reveal not the yard I expected, but a view that made my mind reel. We were everywhere and nowhere at once. I could see the road where my truck had broken down, but I could also see every road that had ever existed in that spot. Game trails from before human habitation, Native American trading paths, colonial roads, the modern highway, and things that might be roads from futures that hadn't happened yet. They all existed simultaneously, overlapping like multiple exposures on old film, and traveling on all of them were the vehicles of every era: wagons, carriages, early automobiles, modern trucks, and things that hurt to look at because they shouldn't exist yet. This is the truth, Celestine said softly. Every road that ever was or ever will be exists here, in this space between spaces. And they all need fuel, all need maintenance, all need families like ours to keep them running. We're not the villains, Jedediah. We're the janitors of reality, the mechanics of existence. Without us, without the sacrifices we collect, it all falls apart. The roads collapse into each other. Time becomes a tangled knot, and humanity gets lost in the maze of its own making. I watched a Model T Ford drive through a Peterbilt truck without either driver noticing. Watched a Conestoga wagon share space with a vehicle that looked like it was made of crystallized light. And underneath it all, I could feel the hunger, the constant gnawing hunger of the roads for more energy, more essence, more fuel to keep the impossible machine running. "How many are there?" I asked. "How many families like yours?" Armand appeared beside us, and for the first time I saw something like sympathy in those pale eyes. "Hundreds," he said. "Maybe thousands. All over the world, wherever humans have built roads on top of older paths, wherever the modern has tried to pave over the ancient. We're a network, a union of sorts. We share techniques, trade resources, sometimes even trade collected souls when the local roads need different kinds of energy. And it's been going on for how long?" I couldn't stop watching the temporal chaos outside, even though it was making my head pound. "Since the first humans decided to walk the same path twice," Marie answered, joining us at the door. "Since the first road was worn into the earth by repeated footsteps. That's when the hunger began, when the paths became aware, became needful. And that's when families like ours made the first deals. Our lives extended indefinitely, in exchange for feeding the roads what they craved." "But you're not alive," I said, finally understanding. "None of you are actually alive, are you? You're like them, like the ones in the cases. You've just learned to maintain the appearance better." Celestine smiled, and for a moment her face flickered, showing the wood and moss and root beneath the illusion of skin. "We're as alive as we need to be," she said. "More than the ones who give themselves completely to the road, less than the ones who never know we exist. We're in between, like everything else here." A sound from deep in the house made them all turn, their faces showing the first real emotion I'd seen: fear. "What was that?" I asked, but they were already moving, closing the door, locking it with the multiple keys I hadn't seen before. "He's waking up," Marie whispered, and Armand's face went grim. Too early. He shouldn't be awake for another decade at least. "Who's waking up?" I demanded, but they were already hurrying me back through the hallways. The sound came again, louder this time, like something massive shifting in the depths of the house. The walls began to groan, the symbols carved into them glowing with that sick green light, and I could feel the temperature dropping rapidly. "The first one," Celestine said, her voice tight with fear. "The original deal-maker, the patriarch of our family. He sleeps beneath the house in the roots of the machine, dreaming the dreams that keep everything stable. When he wakes—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Whatever happened when the first one woke, it wasn't something even they wanted to experience. The house began to shake, not violently, but with a slow, rhythmic pulsing like a massive heartbeat. Dust fell from the ceiling, and cracks appeared in the walls, revealing not insulation or framework, but what looked like flesh, dark and twisted and older than anything should be. From somewhere far below, I heard a voice, speaking in that same ancient language I'd been hearing since I arrived, but with an authority that made the words feel like physical blows. "He's calling for the new one," Armand translated, his face pale despite its wooden texture. "He wants to see you, to judge if you're worthy of joining the family properly. This hasn't happened in my lifetime, and I've been here since 1887. He grabbed my arm, his grip stronger than any human's should be. "Listen to me very carefully. When you meet him, don't look directly at him. Don't speak unless he asks you a direct question. And whatever you do, don't tell him you want to leave. He doesn't understand the concept of leaving. To him, everything that enters the house has always been here and always will be." They led me to a door I hadn't noticed before, one that seemed to exist in a fold of space that hurt to perceive directly. It was made of something that might have been metal or might have been crystallized shadow, and it was already opening, swinging inward with a groan that sounded almost like welcome. Beyond was a staircase that spiraled down into darkness so complete it seemed solid. "We can't go with you," Marie said. And there was something almost like pity in her voice. "This is between you and him. If you survive, if he accepts you, you'll be one of us truly. If not..." She didn't finish, but the way the three of them backed away from the door told me everything I needed to know. I wanted to run, wanted to fight, wanted to do anything but walk down those stairs. But my feet were already moving, carrying me forward without my conscious control. The door swung shut behind me with a finality that felt like the closing of a tomb, and I was alone in the darkness with only the sound of my own footsteps and the growing awareness of something vast and ancient waiting below. The stairs went down forever. Not hyperbole. I counted steps for the first 1,000, then lost track. The temperature continued to drop until my breath came out in clouds I couldn't see in the absolute darkness. The only sound was my footsteps, and that rhythmic pulsing that might have been a heartbeat or might have been the machine itself. The engine that kept all the impossible roads running. Finally, after what felt like hours or days or years, the stairs ended. I stepped onto what felt like packed earth, though it was warm despite the frigid air, and almost alive under my feet. A light appeared in the distance, that same green glow I'd been seeing since this nightmare began, and I walked toward it with the inevitability of a man walking to his execution. The chamber I entered was vast beyond comprehension, carved from living rock or grown from some impossible organism. The walls pulsed with veins of light, and the ceiling was lost in darkness that seemed to go up forever, matching the eternal descent I'd just completed. And in the center, connected to the walls by thousands of root-like tubes that pulsed with dark fluid, was the first one. He wasn't human anymore, if he ever had been. The thing in the center of the chamber might have started as a man, centuries or millennia ago, but now it was something else entirely. The body, if you could call it that, was the size of a small building, made of the same dark wood as the house above, but twisted into impossible anatomical configurations. Where a face should have been, there were dozens of eyes, all different sizes, all those same pale blue-white that the Bro family shared. Arms, hundreds of them, sprouted from what might have been a torso, each one connected to the root tubes that ran into the walls. But it was aware. God help me, it was aware, and it was looking at me with all those eyes, seeing me in ways that human sight could never manage. I remembered Armand's warning and kept my gaze down, focused on the ground, but I could still feel its attention like a physical weight, pressing down on me from all directions. "New one," it said, and the voice came from everywhere, from the walls, from the floor, from inside my own skull. It spoke in English, but underneath I could hear echoes in that ancient language, layers of meaning that my mind couldn't quite grasp. "Been so long since a new one came. The roads are hungrier than they used to be. Need more fuel, more essence, more dreams." I didn't respond, remembering Armand's instruction not to speak unless asked a direct question. The thing shifted, and the entire chamber moved with it, like we were inside something alive, which, I realized with growing horror, we probably were. This wasn't just a room. It was part of the creature, or the creature was part of it. The boundary between architecture and anatomy had been erased. "You have the smell of far roads on you," it continued, and I could hear something like nostalgia in its impossible voice. Texas roads, modern roads, fast roads, different from the old paths, the walking paths, the paths worn by feet instead of wheels, but still hungry, always hungry. "Do you know why roads hunger, new one?" That seemed like a direct question, so I answered, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "No, sir, I don't know why roads hunger." It laughed, or at least I think it was laughter. The sound was like grinding gears mixed with breaking glass, and it went on for far too long. "Sir," haven't been called sir in... Time doesn't mean much down here. Up there, they count years. Down here, we count heartbeats, breaths, dreams. I've been here for 7 million breaths, or maybe 7. Hard to tell the difference anymore. One of its many arms reached toward me, and I saw that the fingers had been replaced with keys. Hundreds of keys of every type and era, from ancient iron things to modern electronic fobs. Roads hunger because movement is life, and life requires sacrifice. Every path ever walked demands payment from those who walk it. In the old days, people knew this, left offerings at crossroads, buried coins at bridges, fed the paths with blood and gold and promises, but you modern ones, you forgot. You build your highways over the old paths without asking permission, without paying the toll, so the roads take what they're owed, one way or another. "The Bro family," I said, forgetting I hadn't been asked to speak. "They're your descendants?" Those dozens of eyes blinked in sequence, creating a rippling effect that made me dizzy. Descendants, servants, extensions, all true, all false. They were a family once. Came here from Acadia when the English drove them out. Found me here, or I found them. We made a deal. They would feed the roads, and I would let them live forever. Not life as you understand it, but existence. Continuation. Purpose. The root tubes pulsed, and I could see shapes moving through them. Not liquid, but something more complex. Images, maybe. Memories. Dreams extracted from all those people in the cases upstairs. "You want to leave," it said, and it wasn't a question. They all want to leave at first, but leaving isn't possible, new one. You've eaten the food, breathed the air, walked the paths between. You're part of the infrastructure now, part of the great machine that keeps reality from collapsing. "Reality won't collapse if I leave," I said, trying to inject some logic into this madness. "The world existed fine before I got here. Did it?" The creature shifted again, and suddenly the walls became transparent, or maybe permeable. Through them, I could see not the earth and rock I expected, but an infinite network of roads, paths, highways, all intersecting and overlapping in ways that hurt to perceive. And traveling on them were not just vehicles but concepts. Ideas made physical, thoughts given form, dreams and nightmares walking the eternal paths between minds. Every road ever imagined exists here, it explained. Every path ever conceived, every route ever dreamed. The physical roads you know are just the tip of an infinite infrastructure, and it all needs fuel. The dreams of travelers, the fears of the lost, the hopes of those heading home. You've been chosen to be part of the collection system, part of the great harvest that keeps the paths open. I watched a memory that looked like my own, a birthday party when I was 7, drive past in the form of a pickup truck made of cake and candles. "That's mine," I said, reaching for it instinctively. "That's my memory." "Was yours," the creature corrected. "Everything that enters here becomes part of the whole. Your memories will fuel roads in places you've never imagined. Your dreams will pave paths between worlds. Your essence will become the infrastructure itself, eternal and purposeful." "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I could already feel the futility of resistance. My body was changing, had been changing since I ate that gumbo. I could feel my skin hardening, taking on the texture of bark. My fingers were starting to elongate, and when I looked at them, I could see they were developing segments like roots. "Look at me," it commanded, and I had no choice but to obey. Those dozens of eyes focused on mine, and in them I saw the truth. Not just my future, but the future of everyone who'd ever been caught in this web. We weren't victims. We were components, parts of a vast machine that existed to maintain the boundaries between what was real and what was possible. You cannot refuse, it said simply. The transformation has already begun, but you can choose how to serve. Fight it and spend eternity in one of Marie's cases, conscious but immobile, your essence extracted drop by drop over centuries. Accept it and become like the Bro family, maintaining the house, collecting new fuel, existing in the spaces between. Or... It paused, and something like a smile crossed whatever served as its face. Or embrace it fully. Become like me. A nexus, a hub where all roads meet. It's not a bad existence. You lose your humanity, yes, but you gain so much more. The ability to see all paths, all possibilities. To touch every road that has ever existed or will ever exist. To be essential to the functioning of reality itself. That's not a choice, I said, my voice cracking. That's just different flavors of damnation. Damnation, it mused, rolling the word around like wine. Such a limited concept. Heaven, hell, damnation, salvation, all just different roads, all requiring the same fuel. The Christians build their highways to paradise, the Buddhists their paths to enlightenment, the atheists their roads to oblivion. All of them pass through here, through the great intersection where every journey meets. The chamber began to pulse more rapidly, and I could feel something building, like pressure before a storm. Choose quickly, it said. The transformation accelerates. Soon, the choice will be made for you by your changing biology. I looked down at myself and gasped. My clothes were starting to merge with my skin, becoming bark-like, textured. My feet had partially rooted into the floor, tiny tendrils digging into what I now realized was not earth, but compressed dreams, solidified memories of 10,000 travelers. I could feel their experiences flowing into me. A traveling salesman's last thoughts before disappearing in 1953. A pioneer woman's fever dreams as she died on a trail that would become Interstate 40. A Native American runner's vision quest that opened a path between worlds. I'll become like them, I said quickly, gesturing upward toward where the Bro family waited. I'll maintain the house, collect the fuel, serve the roads. Just let me keep some part of myself, some memory of who I was. The creature considered this, all its eyes blinking in that sequential pattern. Interesting. Most choose to fight or surrender completely. Few choose the middle path. Very well. You will serve for 100 years, maintaining the house, feeding the roads. After that, if you've served well, you may choose again, continue as you are, descend to join me, or ascend to something else entirely. Ascend to what? I asked, but it was already dismissing me. The floor beneath my feet became soft, and I began to sink. Not down, but in a direction that didn't exist in normal geometry. The last thing I heard was its voice, speaking in that ancient language that I was beginning to understand. The roads are patient, the roads are hungry, the roads are eternal, and now so are you. I emerged in the kitchen of the Bro house, gasping and shaking. Armand, Marie, and Celestine were waiting, their faces showing a mixture of relief and something else. Respect, maybe, or recognition. I looked at my hands and saw they were normal again, human-looking, though I could feel the wood beneath the skin, waiting. You chose wisely, Marie said, helping me to a chair. The middle path is hard, but it allows you to retain enough humanity to remember why the work matters. Complete transformation is easier in some ways. You lose the pain of remembering what you were, but you also lose the ability to truly serve. to understand the travelers whose essence we collect. "How long?" I asked, my voice rough. "How long was I down there?" "3 days," Celestine said. "Or 3 minutes? Or 3 years? Time doesn't—" "You'll learn not to ask such questions. They don't have answers that make sense in the framework you're used to." Armand placed a hand on my shoulder, and I could feel the kinship now, the connection between us. We were all part of the same system, cells in the same vast organism. "Your truck has been found," he said. "Empty, abandoned. Your family has been notified. There will be a search, then a memorial service. Then you'll become another cautionary tale truckers tell each other at rest stops. But you'll still be here doing the work, maintaining the roads." "When do I start?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. I'd already started. From the moment I'd eaten their food, I'd been working, my essence feeding into the great machine even as I fought against it. "Tonight," Marie said. "There's another traveler coming. The road has already chosen them, a woman driving alone from Mobile to Houston. Her car will break down at the same spot yours did. You'll be the one to meet her, to bring her here, to offer her the food. It's always harder when you're the one doing the collecting, but it's necessary. The roads must be fed." I wanted to refuse, to say I wouldn't be part of luring innocent people to this fate, but I could feel the compulsion already, the need to serve that had been written into my transforming cells. And beneath that, something worse, understanding. I understood now why it was necessary, why the roads needed their fuel, why reality itself depended on these horrible sacrifices. "What's her name?" I asked, and Celestine smiled that too perfect smile. "Does it matter? She'll have a new name soon enough, a new purpose. Just like you, Jedediah Fontenot, who was. You're not that person anymore. You're part of the Bro family now, part of the house, part of the eternal maintenance crew that keeps the impossible possible." That night, I walked back to the road where my truck had died. It was still there, somehow, though I knew it had also been found empty on a normal highway hundreds of miles away. Both things were true. All things were true on the roads between. I stood there in my new old clothes, overalls, and a plaid shirt that materialized from nowhere, or maybe from everywhere, and waited. She came just after midnight, her Honda Civic sputtering to a stop exactly where mine had. She was young, maybe 25, with tired eyes and clothes that suggested she'd been driving for days. When she saw me approaching, she tensed, ready to flee or fight. But then I smiled. That same, too-perfect smile the Bro family had perfected over centuries, and spoke in a voice that was mine, but not mine. "Engine trouble, Cher. That happens sometimes on this road." And just like that, the cycle continued. I led her to the house that existed between moments, to the family that wasn't quite alive or dead, to the gumbo that would begin her transformation. I watched her eat, watched the confusion and fear in her eyes, watched the beginning of understanding, and I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt everything. The satisfaction of the roads being fed, the relief of the infrastructure being maintained, the cosmic rightness of sacrifice and service. Later, after she'd been shown to her room, after the transformation had begun, I stood on the porch that wrapped around the impossible house and looked out at the layered realities. I could see my old life like a ghost image. My truck driving down a normal highway, my sister waiting for a visit that would never come, my friends telling stories about whatever happened to old Jed. But it felt distant, unimportant, like a dream I'd once had. Celestine joined me, and for a moment her guard dropped, and I saw the sadness beneath the perfect smile. "It gets easier," she said. "The first few years are the hardest. You still remember too much, but eventually the work becomes everything. The feeding, the maintaining, the eternal service to the roads. It becomes who you are instead of what you do. "How long have you been here?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "I came with the original Acadians," she said simply. 1765. Or yesterday, or tomorrow. Time doesn't, but you know that already. She looked at me with those pale eyes, and I saw centuries of collected souls reflected in them. We all tell ourselves it's necessary, that without us, reality would collapse, the roads would fail, civilization would end. And maybe it's true, or maybe it's just a story we tell to make the eternal servitude bearable. Either way, we continue. We feed the roads, we maintain the infrastructure, we exist between, forever. A scream echoed from inside the house, the woman I'd brought, discovering what she was becoming. I should have felt guilt, horror, regret, but I felt only the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. The roads were fed for another day, the infrastructure was maintained, the great machine continued to run. Over the weeks that followed, which were also years and seconds, I learned my role in the family. I was the collector, the one who met the chosen travelers and brought them home. Armand maintained the physical structure of the house, keeping it stable between dimensions. Marie tended to the transforming souls, easing their transition from human to component. And Celestine operated the great machine, channeling the collected essence into the road network. I learned that there were rules to the collecting. We couldn't take just anyone, only those the roads chose, those whose essence resonated at the right frequency. We couldn't force them to eat. They had to accept the food freely, even if they didn't understand what they were accepting. And we couldn't take too many. The roads were hungry, but not greedy. Too much fuel and they'd become unstable. Start manifesting in places they shouldn't, creating paradoxes that even our timeless existence couldn't resolve. I learned that the house had many rooms, each one containing a different era of collected souls. The oldest were barely human anymore, just conscious wood feeding dreams into the machine. The newest fought and screamed and begged, and in between were all stages of acceptance, resignation, transformation. I learned their names, their stories, their final thoughts before they stopped thinking in human terms. Each one became part of my responsibility, part of my burden, part of my purpose. 6 months in, or maybe 6 decades, I stopped trying to count time. A year in, or maybe a century, I stopped remembering my sister's face. 2 years in, or maybe 2 millennia, I stopped fighting the wood beneath my skin and let it show through when I was inside the house. My fingers could extend into root-like tendrils that could read the essence of potential travelers from miles away. My eyes developed that pale cast that marked all of us, seeing not just the physical world, but all the layered realities beneath. But I kept my promise to that thing in the depths. I served, I collected, I maintained. I became an exemplary member of the Bro family, even as I knew the name was just convenience. We weren't really a family. We were organs in the same vast body, components in the same impossible machine. But the fiction of family made the eternal service bearable, gave structure to existence that had no beginning or end. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and the roads were temporarily sated, I would remember being Jedediah Fontenot. Remember driving through the night with coffee and radio for company. Remember the simple pleasure of completing a delivery, of calling my sister, of being human. But the memories felt like someone else's, like a movie I'd once watched about a life I'd never lived. They were fuel now, just like everything else. Food for the roads that connected every point to every other point in the vast web of reality. The woman I'd brought that first night became like a daughter to me, or maybe a sister, or maybe just another component in the machine. Her name had been Sarah, but we called her Seraphine now. She fought longer than most, almost a full year before she accepted her role. But eventually, they all accept. The alternative, fighting forever against a transformation that's already happened, is too exhausting. Better to embrace the purpose, to find meaning in the maintenance, to take pride in keeping the impossible infrastructure running. And it does run. Every day, every night, every moment that exists or doesn't, we keep it running. The roads carry their traffic between realities, between times, between states of being. Commuters drive to work on highways built over paths between worlds. Truckers haul cargo through dimensions they can't perceive. Travelers cross bridges that span more than just water. And underneath it all, in houses that exist in the spaces between, families like ours feed the eternal hunger that keeps it all possible. I am Jedediah Fontenot. I was Jedediah Fontenot. I will be Jedediah Fontenot. All of these are true, and none of them are true. I drive trucks through the night. I collect souls for the hungry roads. I exist in the space between life and death, between real and impossible, between the highways you know and the paths you can't imagine. And if you ever find yourself on a dark Louisiana back road, and your engine dies for no reason, and an old man in overalls emerges from the darkness to offer help, remember this: the roads are hungry, the roads are patient, and the roads always collect what they're owed. The infrastructure must be maintained, the machine must be fed, and somewhere, in a house that exists between heartbeats, the Bro family is setting another place at their table, preparing another bowl of gumbo, adding another name to the eternal roster of those who keep the impossible possible. The middle path I chose means I remember enough to warn you, but not enough to save you, because saving you would mean starving the roads, and starving the roads would mean the collapse of everything. So I continue. We all continue. Forever and never, always and not at all, feeding the hunger that keeps the world turning on its invisible axis. This is my story. Was my story. Will be my story. And now it's yours too, because everyone who hears it becomes part of it. Another thread in the vast web of roads that connect everything to everything else. Drive safely. Stay on the main highways. And whatever you do, never eat the gumbo. The name's Zebulon Arsenault, though nobody's called me by my full name since my grandmother passed 15 years ago. These days, it's just Zeb, and I've been running freight through Louisiana and the surrounding states for the better part of 18 years. I know every back road, every shortcut, every place where the cops set up speed traps, and every diner where the coffee won't taste like motor oil. But knowing the roads and understanding them are two different things, and what happened that September night on Highway 415 near False River taught me that some knowledge comes with a price that keeps compounding interest until you're so deep in debt you forget you ever owned yourself. It was supposed to be a standard run, hauling a load of industrial pipe from a fabrication yard in Morgan City up to a construction site in Natchez. I'd done similar runs hundreds of times, knew exactly how long it would take, where I'd stop for fuel, which routes to avoid during certain times of day. The dispatcher at Pelican Freight, where I'd been contracting for the past 6 years, gave me the paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special about it. Bill of lading, delivery address, contact numbers. The only unusual thing was a handwritten note at the bottom that said, "Night delivery preferred. Site security will be waiting." Night deliveries weren't uncommon in construction, especially for big projects that didn't want to deal with daytime traffic. So I didn't think twice about timing my departure to arrive in Natchez around 2 in the morning. Left Morgan City just after sunset. That time when the sky turns the color of old blood and the humidity makes everything look like it's underwater. The loading had gone smooth. The pipes secured properly, everything by the book. I even had time to grab a proper meal at a truck stop outside Franklin. Red beans and rice with andouille that actually had some kick to it. The first couple hours of the drive were peaceful, almost meditative. Interstate 90 to Lafayette, then up Highway 49 toward Alexandria before cutting west on the smaller highways. I had an audiobook playing, some thriller about a detective in New Orleans that got more ridiculous with every chapter, and a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The truck was running smooth, that steady diesel rumble that becomes like a heartbeat when you've been driving long enough. Everything was normal, routine, forgettable. It was just past 11 when I turned onto Highway 415, planning to follow it up toward the False River area before cutting across to Highway 61 for the final stretch into Natchez. The road was empty, which wasn't unusual for that time of night in that area. Just me, the yellow lines, and the occasional reflective eyes of some animal in the brush. The Spanish moss hanging from the cypress trees looked silver in my headlights, like nature's own tinsel. And there was a light fog starting to roll in from the water. That's when I saw it. Maybe 3 miles after I'd turned onto 415, right where the road curves around a particularly thick stand of cypress. A truck parked on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking that familiar amber rhythm that every trucker recognizes as trouble. It was a Kenworth, older model, maybe late 90s, painted that faded blue that could have once been navy. No company logos that I could see, which was odd, but not unheard of among independent owner-operators. I slowed down as I approached, partly out of caution and partly out of that unwritten code among truckers. You see, someone broke down. You at least slow down to check if they need help. As I got closer, my headlights swept across the scene, and something felt wrong immediately. The driver's door was open, dome light on, but I couldn't see anyone around. The trailer doors were open too, swinging slightly in the breeze, and I could see it was empty inside. Not just empty of cargo, but cleaned out, like someone had swept it. I pulled over about 50 feet ahead of the abandoned rig, turned on my own hazards, and sat there for a moment, debating. Every instinct told me to keep driving, that whatever had happened here was none of my business, but there was also the possibility that someone was hurt, maybe thrown from the cab in an accident, lying in the brush, needing help. The human thing to do was to at least look around, maybe call it in to the state police if nobody was there. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, checking to make sure I had signal, 2 bars, not great, but enough, and climbed down from my cab. The night was quieter than it should have been. No crickets, no frogs, none of the usual symphony of a Louisiana night. Just the tick-tick-tick of cooling engines and the distant sound of water lapping against something I couldn't see. The fog was thicker here, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet, and it had that peculiar quality of fog near water where it seems to glow from within. I walked back toward the abandoned truck, sweeping my flashlight beam across the scene. No skid marks on the road, no damaged barriers, nothing to suggest an accident. The truck itself looked fine from the outside, no visible damage, tires intact, everything normal except for those open doors. I called out, "Hello? Anybody here? You need help?" My voice seemed to be swallowed by the fog before it could travel very far. No response. I approached the cab, shining my light inside. The keys were still in the ignition, engine off but the battery still powering the dome light. There was a thermos in the cup holder, still warm when I touched it, and a logbook open on the passenger seat. I knew I shouldn't touch anything. This was looking more and more like a crime scene. But I couldn't help glancing at the last entry in the log. It was dated 3 days ago, which didn't make sense. The coffee was still warm. The dome light should have killed the battery if it had been on for 3 days. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't coming from the cab, but from somewhere behind the truck. Sweet and metallic, like copper pennies mixed with overripe fruit. I followed it, flashlight beam cutting through the fog until I found the source. There was a puddle of something dark on the asphalt. Too thick to be oil, too dark to be coolant. I knelt down, careful not to touch it, and that's when I saw the trail. Whatever had made the puddle had been dragged, or had dragged itself, off the road and into the brush. Every horror movie I'd ever seen was screaming at me to get back in my truck and leave. But there was something else, something stronger than fear or common sense. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was some misguided sense of duty, or maybe it was something else entirely, something that had been waiting for me to find this exact spot at this exact time. Whatever it was, I followed the trail into the brush. The undergrowth was thick, the kind of tangled vegetation that makes you wonder how anything bigger than a rabbit could move through it. But there was a path, or what had once been a path, marked by broken branches and that same dark substance that gleamed wetly in my flashlight beam. Spanish moss brushed against my face like wet fingers, and more than once I had to stop to untangle myself from vines that seemed to grab at my clothes with deliberate intent. About 20 yards in, the path opened up into a small clearing. In the center was something that made me stop cold, my breath catching in my throat. It was a shrine, for lack of a better word, made from truck parts, mirrors, chrome bumpers, mud flaps, license plates, all arranged in a careful pattern around a central structure that looked like it was made from welded-together CB radios. The whole thing was covered in that same dark substance I'd been following, and there were symbols painted or carved into each piece, symbols that hurt to look at directly. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the photographs tucked into every available space. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all of truckers. Some looked recent, digital prints on regular paper. Others were older, Polaroids and film prints yellowed with age. I recognized a few faces. Drivers who'd gone missing over the years, written off as runaways or victims of highway robbery. Their pictures were here in this impossible shrine in the Louisiana brush. Their eyes seeming to follow my flashlight beam. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but the screen was dead. Not powered off, not out of battery. Dead, like the electronics had been fried. I tried the power button, held it down, nothing. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, then came back at half power. The fog was getting thicker if that was possible, and the air temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees in the span of seconds. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from multiple directions at once. Not trying to be stealthy, just walking with the patience of something that knew its prey had nowhere to run. I turned, sweeping the dying flashlight beam around the clearing, and caught glimpses of figures in the fog. They were wearing uniforms. Truckers' clothes from different eras, different companies. But they moved wrong, too synchronized, like they were all controlled by the same puppeteer. I ran, crashed through the brush the way I'd come, branches tearing at my clothes, my face, my hands. Behind me, those footsteps kept pace, neither speeding up nor falling behind. The path back seemed longer than the path in, twisting in ways I didn't remember, leading me through areas I hadn't passed before. The fog was so thick now I could barely see my own feet, and my flashlight finally died completely, leaving me to navigate by instinct and terror. Somehow, by luck or providence or something else, I burst out of the brush right next to my truck. I didn't look back, didn't check to see if those figures were still following. I yanked open my cab door, hauled myself up, and turned the key so hard I was afraid it might break off. The engine roared to life, and I threw it in gear. not caring about proper acceleration or checking my mirrors. I just needed to move, to put distance between myself and whatever was in that clearing. It wasn't until I was 5 miles down the road, hands still shaking on the wheel, that I realized something was wrong with my load. The weight felt different, the trailer pulling strange. I found a well-lit gas station and pulled in, parking under the brightest lights I could find. When I walked back to check the trailer, my blood went cold. The industrial pipes I'd been hauling were gone. In their place was something else, something wrapped in heavy tarps and secured with chains I didn't recognize. I stood there for a long moment, staring at those tarps, knowing I should call the police, my dispatcher, someone. But my phone was working again, showing full battery and signal, and when I checked the time, only 5 minutes had passed since I'd first seen the abandoned truck. That wasn't possible. I'd been in those woods for at least an hour. The timestamp on my truck's GPS confirmed it. 5 minutes, 12 seconds since my last logged position. I climbed into the trailer, needing to know what was under those tarps, even though every cell in my body was screaming at me to leave it alone. The chains were old, rusted, but they came apart easily, like they wanted to be removed. I pulled back the first tarp, and underneath was a collection of personal effects. Wallets, cell phones, CB radios, all from different eras, all showing signs of age and weather. Each item had a small tag attached to it with string, and on each tag was a name and a date. Some of the dates went back decades. The second tarp was worse. Underneath were logbooks, dozens of them, all filled out in different handwriting but telling the same story. Truckers who'd found an abandoned rig on Highway 415. Truckers who'd investigated. Truckers who'd found the shrine. And all of them ending with the same entry. The cargo has changed. I'm being followed. They want me to complete the delivery. I checked my own logbook, the one I'd been filling out at the beginning of this run. The last entry wasn't in my handwriting. It said, accepted the cargo, proceeding to destination, expected arrival, never. That's when I heard the knock on the trailer door. 3 slow raps, patient and deliberate. I turned, and through the open doors I could see him standing in the parking lot. Deputy Silas Guidry, according to the name tag on his uniform. But his uniform was from the 1970s, complete with the wide-brimmed campaign hat they don't wear anymore. His face was pale, bloodless, and his eyes were solid black, like pools of oil. "You found it," he said, and his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "That means you're the new driver. The route must be completed. The cargo must be delivered." He pulled out a clipboard, and I could see it was covered in rust and what might have been dried blood. "Sign here, please. Accept the transfer. It's easier if you don't fight it." I backed away, deeper into the trailer, but there was nowhere to go. Deputy Guidry climbed up into the trailer with movements that were too smooth, too fluid, like his joints bent in ways they shouldn't. "Every route needs a driver," he continued, that wet voice getting closer. "Every cargo needs delivery. You found the abandoned rig, which means the last driver finally made it to his destination. Now it's your turn. Sign the papers, accept the cargo, drive the route that never ends." I slammed my shoulder into Deputy Guidry, or whatever was wearing his face, and felt my body pass through something cold and wet, like diving into a pool of motor oil. He didn't fall, didn't even stagger, just stood there with that patient expression while I scrambled past him and jumped down from the trailer. My boots hit the asphalt hard, sending shocks up through my legs, but I was already running toward my cab. Behind me, I heard his voice, still calm, still patient. "You can't run from a route that's already been logged. The cargo knows its destination. The truck knows its driver. The road knows its purpose." But I wasn't listening. I yanked open my cab door, hauled myself up, and reached for the gear shift. My hand froze. The keys weren't in the ignition. I knew I'd left them there, always did when I was checking the load. Bad habit, but hard to break. They were gone. Looking for these? Deputy Guidry was standing by my driver's side door now, impossibly fast for someone who'd been 30 feet away seconds ago. He held up my keys, and they were covered in that same rust that covered his clipboard. You need to sign first, accept the transfer, then you can drive. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. I locked the doors, knowing it was useless but needing the illusion of barrier between us. Through the window, I could see his face more clearly now. It wasn't just pale. It was waterlogged, bloated, like someone who'd been pulled from a river after days. His uniform was dripping, not with water but with something darker, thicker. And behind him, emerging from the fog that had somehow followed us to this well-lit gas station, were others. All in various uniforms from different decades, all with that same drowned look, all carrying clipboards. The route must be completed, they said in unison, their voices creating a harmony that made my teeth ache. The cargo must be delivered. The driver must accept the transfer. I pulled out my phone again, desperate to call someone, anyone. But the screen showed something impossible. Instead of my normal interface, it was displaying a GPS route. Starting point, here. Destination, the end of all roads. Estimated arrival, never. And the route itself was a maze of highways that didn't exist, roads that couldn't exist, paths that led through places named things like the Drowning Mile, and Eternal Turnpike, and the last stop before nothing. A tap on the passenger window made me jump. There was a woman there, wearing a truck stop waitress uniform from what looked like the 1960s. Her name tag read Delphine Robichaud, and her face had that same waterlogged quality as the deputy. "Sugar," she said, her voice muffled through the glass but still clearly audible. "You need to understand something. This ain't a punishment, it's a promotion. You've been chosen to drive the route that keeps all the other routes running. Without drivers like us, the whole system falls apart." "Like you?" I managed to say, my voice cracking. "You're not driving anything. You're dead. All of you are dead." She smiled, and water leaked from the corners of her mouth. Dead is such a limited concept, Cher. We're between life and death, between here and there, between departure and arrival. We're the infrastructure, the essential workers who keep the cosmic supply chain moving. And now you've been recruited. I looked around the gas station parking lot, expecting to see other people, normal people who might help or at least witness what was happening. But it was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of everything. The gas pumps were gone. The store was gone. Even the lights were gone, though somehow I could still see. We were in a bubble of nowhere, a pocket of space that existed outside normal reality. "Fine," I said, trying to buy time, trying to think. "What's the cargo? What am I supposedly delivering?" Deputy Guidry pressed his face against my driver's side window, and his features flattened against the glass like putty. "Memories," he said. "Lost moments. Final thoughts. Everything that disappears when someone vanishes on the highway. It all has to go somewhere, be processed, cataloged, delivered to the appropriate departments. Death has a bureaucracy, Mr. Arsenault. And, like any bureaucracy, it needs its truck drivers." I laughed, couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all, death running a shipping company, was too much. But the laughter died in my throat when I saw they weren't joking, weren't even capable of joking anymore. They were serious, deadly serious, pun intended. "And if I refuse?" I asked. though I could already feel the futility of resistance. The cab was getting colder, and frost was forming on the inside of the windows despite the Louisiana heat that should have been outside. "Then you sit here," Delphine said simply, "forever, or until you accept. Time doesn't mean much in the between spaces. You could sit here for what feels like seconds while decades pass outside, or sit for centuries while only minutes tick by in the real world. Eventually, everyone signs. Everyone accepts the transfer, because the alternative is worse than any hell you can imagine, being stuck in a single moment, unable to move forward or back, just existing in the eternal now of refusal." To prove her point, she gestured to the back of the parking lot. There was another truck there that I hadn't noticed before, older, covered in rust and vegetation like it had been sitting for years. Through the windshield, I could see the driver. He was still sitting there, hands on the wheel, eyes staring straight ahead. Alive, somehow, but frozen in a moment of eternal refusal. "That's Boudreaux," Deputy Guidry said. "Been sitting there since 1987. 34 years of saying no. 34 years of watching the world change through his windshield while he stays exactly the same. His family held a funeral. His wife remarried. His kids grew up, had kids of their own, and he's been sitting right there aware of all of it, unable to do anything but refuse." I looked at the frozen driver, saw the madness in his unblinking eyes, and knew I couldn't do that. Couldn't sit in this cab for decades, watching my life disappear while I stubbornly held on to a refusal that ultimately meant nothing. But I also couldn't just give in, couldn't accept whatever they wanted me to accept without understanding what I was agreeing to. "Show me the real cargo," I said. "Not the tarps and chains. Show me what I'm really hauling." They exchanged glances, these waterlogged spirits of the highway, and Deputy Guidry nodded slowly. Fair enough. A driver should know his load. He walked back to my trailer, and I followed, unlocking my doors with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The fog parted as we walked, creating a corridor of clear air that led directly to the trailer doors. When he pulled back the tarps this time, really pulled them back, what was underneath defied description. It wasn't objects or boxes or anything physical in the normal sense. It was like looking at condensed existence, memories given form, final moments crystallized into something you could almost touch. I saw a father's last thought of his children before a head-on collision. A mother's final prayer before her car went off a bridge. A young couple's last words of love before a drunk driver ended everything. Thousands upon thousands of endings, all needing to be delivered to wherever endings go. Every road death, Deputy Guidry explained, leaves behind more than just a body. It leaves behind unfinished business, untold stories, love that never got expressed. All of that has to be collected, processed, delivered to the appropriate recipients in the appropriate realms. Some goes to what you might call heaven, some to other places, but it all has to be transported. That's where we come in. We're psychopomps, Delphine added. Ferryman, Karen on 18 wheels. We drive the routes between life and death, making sure nothing gets lost in transition. It's important work, sacred work, and the road chose you to join us. I stared at the impossible cargo, feeling the weight of all those endings pressing against my consciousness. Why me? Why was I chosen? You've always seen the roads differently, Deputy Guidry said. Felt them differently. You know they're not just asphalt and concrete. They're arteries, veins, neural pathways in something much larger than human comprehension. You felt the pulse of traffic, the breath of the highways, the dreams of the interstate. That sensitivity makes you perfect for this work. He was right. I had always felt it, that sense that the roads were alive in some way. The way certain stretches seemed to have moods, personalities. The way some highways felt angry, others sad, others peaceful. I'd attributed it to imagination, to too many hours alone with my thoughts. But maybe I'd been sensing something real all along. "If I agree," I said slowly, "if I sign your papers and accept this transfer, what happens to me? Do I become like you? Waterlogged and dead?" "Only if you fight it," Delphine said. "Only if you try to stay connected to your old life while doing the new work. The water you see on us? That's the river Styx, the boundary between worlds. We tried to keep one foot on each bank and the river claimed us. But if you accept fully, if you commit completely to the work, you can maintain your form, become something new, something necessary." I thought about my life. 41 years old, never married, no kids, just an endless succession of highways and deliveries. My only family was a brother in Houston who I saw maybe twice a year, and a collection of acquaintances at truck stops who knew my handle, but not my real name. What exactly would I be giving up? A lonely apartment in Baton Rouge? A truck that was 3 payments behind? A future of more of the same until my body gave out or I had one too many close calls on the highway. "There's something you're not telling me," I said, looking at their faces, seeing the careful way they were presenting this choice. "Some catch you're leaving out." Deputy Guidry nodded, seemingly impressed. "Perceptive, yes, there's more. Once you start driving these routes, you can never fully return to the normal world. You'll exist in the between spaces, the overlap zones where multiple realities intersect. You'll see every timeline, every possibility, every what if. You'll deliver cargo to places that don't exist in any map. And sometimes, just sometimes, you'll have to make decisions about which endings go where. Become judge and jury for the unfinished business of the dead." "And the abandoned truck?" I asked. "The one I found on the highway? What happened to that driver?" "He completed his route," Delphine said simply. "After 40 years of driving the between roads, he finally reached his destination. The end of all roads. What he found there we don't know. No one who reaches it ever comes back to tell. But his truck remained, waiting for the next driver, waiting for you." I walked back to the abandoned rig, the one that had started all this. In the strange non-light of this between space, I could see it clearly now. It wasn't just a truck. It was a monument, a symbol, a door between worlds. Every inch of it was covered in tiny scratches that, when you looked closely, were names. Thousands of names. Every driver who'd ever driven these impossible routes. "If I sign," I said, "my name goes on there too?" "Eventually," Deputy Guidry said. "When you complete your route, however long that takes." I found myself reaching for the clipboard, the one covered in rust and what I now realized was water from that cosmic river Delphine had mentioned. The paper attached to it was not paper at all, but something that felt organic, like skin or leaves or both. The words written on it shifted and changed as I looked at them, showing the contract in every language that had ever existed and some that hadn't been invented yet. But the basic meaning was clear. Accept the transfer, drive the route, deliver the cargo, become part of the eternal infrastructure that processes the endless stream of endings that every highway produces every day. The pen in my hand felt heavier than any load I'd ever hauled. It wasn't metal or plastic, but something that might have been bone, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The signature line on the contract pulsed with a faint red glow, like it had its own heartbeat, waiting for me to make my choice. I stood there in that impossible space between the gas station that wasn't and the highway that couldn't be, surrounded by the waterlogged dead who drove routes through territories unmapped by any cartographer. "Before I sign," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to know something. Can I ever see my brother again? Can I ever have any kind of normal human contact?" It seemed like a stupid question given the circumstances, but it suddenly felt important, like the last thread connecting me to who I'd been. Delphine Robichaud's expression softened, and for a moment she looked almost alive again. "You can visit," she said. "Appear at truck stops, diners, rest areas, have conversations, share meals, even help stranded motorists. But they won't remember you clearly afterward. You'll be that helpful trucker they met once but can't quite describe, that conversation they had but can't quite recall. You become part of the folklore of the road, a story people tell but don't quite believe." "Ghost stories," I said, understanding dawning. "All those urban legends about phantom truckers, mysterious helpers who appear and disappear, drivers who give rides to people who turn out to have been dead for years. That's all you, all of us, if I sign." Deputy Guidry nodded. "Every legend has a truth at its core. We're that truth. We exist in the spaces between belief and disbelief, between story and reality. Your brother might see you, might even have dinner with you, but afterward, he'll convince himself it was someone who looked like you, or a dream, or a story he heard from someone else." I thought about that, about becoming a living ghost story, and found it didn't bother me as much as it should have. I'd always been somewhat invisible anyway, just another trucker among thousands, anonymous behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler. This would just be a different kind of invisibility, one with purpose. "The cargo," I said, looking back at the trailer full of crystallized endings. "Where exactly am I supposed to deliver it? You keep talking about destinations, but you haven't said where." "That's because the destinations change," Deputy Guidry explained. "Every load is different. Some go to what you might recognize as afterlife processing centers, places where souls are sorted and sent to their appropriate eternal destinations. Others go to memory banks, where the experiences of the dead are cataloged and stored. Some go to the dreams of the living, delivered as messages or warnings or final goodbyes. The route reveals itself as you drive. The road tells you where to go." "And this end of all roads place," I asked, "where the previous driver went, what is that?" They all exchanged glances, and I could see uncertainty in their waterlogged faces. "Nobody knows," Delphine admitted. "It's the destination that appears on every driver's route eventually. Some reach it after decades, others after centuries. But it's always the final delivery, the one from which no one returns. Maybe it's retirement. Maybe it's oblivion. Maybe it's something else entirely. All we know is that when a driver reaches it, their truck returns empty, waiting for the next recruit." I looked down at the contract again. The words had stabilized now, showing clearly what I was agreeing to. It was simpler than I expected. I accept the transfer of cargo and responsibility. I agree to drive the routes between worlds. I understand that this service is eternal until the end of all roads is reached. I commit myself to the infrastructure of transition. Simple words for an incomprehensible commitment. But as I stood there, I realized something. I'd been preparing for this my whole life. Every night drive through empty highways, every moment of feeling like the roads were alive, every time I'd sensed something more in the movement of traffic. It had all been preparation for this moment. I signed my name. The moment the pen left the paper, everything changed. The world exploded into layers, like someone had taken reality and spread it out like a deck of cards. I could see the gas station as it was, as it had been, as it would be. I could see every car that had ever stopped there, every person who'd ever pumped gas, every conversation that had ever taken place. And underneath it all, I could see the real structure, the bones of reality, the framework that held everything together. The waterlogged spirits around me suddenly looked different. They weren't drowned or dead. They were transformed, adapted to exist in the spaces between air and water, between life and death. Deputy Guidry's uniform wasn't from the 1970s. It was from every era simultaneously, a composite of all law enforcement that had ever existed or ever would exist. Delphine wasn't a waitress from the 1960s. She was every server who'd ever offered comfort to a weary traveler, condensed into a single, eternal form. "Welcome to the infrastructure," Deputy Guidry said, and his voice now had harmonics I hadn't heard before, layers of meaning in every word. "Your first load is already in your trailer. The route is already in your GPS. All you have to do is drive." I walked back to my truck, and it looked different too. Not physically. It was still the same Peterbilt I'd been driving for years. But I could see its history now, every mile it had traveled, every load it had carried, every driver who'd sat behind its wheel, and I could see its future too, the millions of miles it would travel on roads that didn't exist on any map, carrying cargo that couldn't be weighed or measured in any conventional sense. The keys were in my hand, though I didn't remember picking them up. They were my keys, but also every key, able to start any vehicle that had ever existed or would ever exist. I climbed into the cab, and the seat adjusted itself to my form, molding to me in a way that felt like coming home. The engine started with a sound that was part diesel rumble, part cosmic harmony. The GPS flickered to life, showing a route that made no geographic sense. Take Highway 415 to the intersection of regrets. Turn left at the memory of water. Continue straight through the valley of unspoken words. Destination, the archive of almost. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the gas station that was already beginning to fade back into normal reality. As I drove, I could feel the weight of the cargo shifting in the trailer. Not physical weight, but metaphysical mass. Thousands of endings, each one needing to be delivered to its appropriate destination. I could sense them individually now, a grandmother's last thought of her grandchildren, a teenager's final text message never sent, a father's unfinished apology. Each one had a specific destination, a particular place in the grand filing system of existence where it needed to be cataloged and processed. The highway looked normal to anyone else who might have been watching. Just another truck driving through the Louisiana night. But I could see the real road underneath, a shimmering pathway made of compressed time and crystallized possibility. Other trucks passed me, and I could tell which ones were like me, carrying impossible cargo to impossible places. We acknowledged each other with subtle signals, a flash of lights that normal drivers would interpret as courtesy, but which actually communicated in a language older than words. About an hour into the drive, I saw my first crossroads. Not a normal intersection, but a place where multiple realities converged. I could turn left and deliver some of the cargo to a place where the dead waited to be born again. I could turn right and take other pieces to a library, where every unfinished story was being completed by ghostwriter spirits. Or I could continue straight to the archive of almost, where near misses and close calls were stored for review and analysis. The road told me to continue straight, so I did. The landscape outside my windows began to change. The Louisiana swamps faded into something else. Not a different geography, but a different kind of space entirely. Trees became suggestions of trees, ideas of vegetation that had never quite manifested in physical reality. The sky was every color and no color, showing stars from constellations that had been proposed but never formed. And on the side of the road, I could see other travelers. Not just truckers, but all kinds of beings moving between worlds. Some looked human, others didn't. And others were in states of transition I couldn't quite process. A voice crackled over my CB radio, which I hadn't turned on. "Breaker, breaker, this is Eternal Dispatch. New driver, please respond." I picked up the handset, noting how it felt both familiar and alien in my grip. "This is..." I paused. What was my handle now? My old one didn't seem to fit anymore. "This is Ferryman 57, responding to Eternal Dispatch. Welcome to the routes, Ferryman 57. Your cargo is confirmed for the archive of Almost. Estimated arrival in 3 hours, subjective time, 17 minutes, objective time, or 6 days, dream time, depending on your frame of reference. Please be aware that you'll be passing through the sorrow zones. Maintain emotional barriers, and don't stop for hitchhikers unless they show proper transitional documentation." "Copy that, Eternal Dispatch. Any specific hazards I should know about?" There was a pause. Then a different voice came on, older, more tired. 57, this is Ferryman 19. Been driving these routes since 1842. The sorrow zones are heavy right now. Lot of unprocessed grief from the pandemic years. It'll try to seep into your cab, make you feel things that aren't yours. Keep your windows up and your radio on. Music helps, especially anything recorded before 1950 or after 2015. Don't ask me why those years, nobody knows. Appreciated, 19. I'll keep that in mind. One more thing, rookie. You're hauling endings, right? First load always is. Some of them might try to talk to you, convince you they're not ready to be delivered. Don't listen. They had their chance at closure in life. Now they're just cargo. Treat them with respect, but remember, they're cargo. The radio went silent, and I was alone again with the sound of my engine and the weight of all those endings in my trailer. As I drove deeper into the sorrow zones, I understood what Ferryman 19 had meant. The air itself was thick with grief, with the accumulated sadness of everyone who'd ever lost someone on a highway. It pressed against the windows like fog, but fog made of tears and regrets and words that came too late. My radio started playing on its own. Old jazz from the 1930s, the kind with that tinny quality that somehow made it more real than modern recordings. It helped, creating a barrier between me and the crushing weight of sorrow outside. But I could still feel it, still sense the individual griefs as I passed through them. A mother's grief for a son killed by a drunk driver. A husband's grief for a wife who didn't survive the accident. Children's grief for parents who left for work and never came home. And underneath it all, I could feel my own grief, the one I'd been carrying without acknowledging it. Grief for the life I was leaving behind, even though it hadn't been much of a life. Grief for the normal death I'd never have, the regular ending that was no longer an option. I was immortal now, in a sense, but it was an immortality of service, of eternal driving through spaces between spaces, delivering the remnants of other people's mortality. That's when I heard the voice from the trailer. Soft at first, barely audible over the jazz and the engine noise. "Please. I'm not supposed to be here. There's been a mistake." I knew I shouldn't respond. Ferryman 19 had warned me. They're just cargo. But the voice was so clear, so human, so desperately alive in a way that the crystallized endings shouldn't be. I kept driving, hands tight on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The jazz on the radio shifted to a particularly mournful piece, a trumpet crying out notes that sounded like they were being played at the funeral of the universe itself. "Please," the voice came again, stronger now. "My name is Catherine. Catherine Thibodeau. I was in an accident on Highway 415, But I'm not dead. I can't be dead. I can feel everything. I can think. I can remember my daughter's birthday is next week. Thibodeau. The name hit me like a physical blow. Same surname as Beauregard Thibodeau, whose story every trucker in Louisiana knew. The one who'd disappeared on the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge. Could be coincidence. Louisiana was full of Thibodeaus. But on these roads, in these between spaces, coincidences didn't exist. Everything was connected by threads of causality that spread across dimensions. I pulled over, if you could call it that. The shoulder of the road was made of compressed starlight and abandoned prayers. The moment I stopped, the sorrow zones pressed harder against my truck, trying to seep through the metal and glass. I could hear crying from a million accidents, see the shadows of every car that had ever gone off the road in the rain. But I had to check, had to know. I climbed out of the cab and walked back to the trailer. The doors were already opening, responding to my intention before I could physically reach them. Inside, the cargo had changed. What had been abstract crystallizations of endings were now more visible, more defined. I could see faces in them, moments frozen at the point of transition. And there, near the back, was something different. Something that pulsed with a light that wasn't like the others. Catherine Thibodeau wasn't a crystallized ending. She was something else. A living consciousness that had somehow been swept up in the collection. Tagged as cargo when she shouldn't have been. She existed in a space about 3 feet square, visible as a shimmer in the air that showed a woman in her 30s, brown hair, eyes wide with terror and confusion. She was wearing medical scrubs, and there was blood on them, but she was definitely not dead. Not alive in the conventional sense either, but not dead. "You can see me," she said, and her voice was clearer now, coming from right in front of me instead of filtered through metal and distance. "Oh God, you can actually see me. Please, you have to help me. I don't belong here. I was driving home from a double shift at Lafayette General. There was fog, something in the road. I swerved, and then I was here, in this darkness, surrounded by all these endings." I reached out carefully, and my hand passed through the space where she existed. It felt warm, electric, alive in a way the other cargo didn't. She was right, she didn't belong here. But she was here, which meant the system had made an error. Or something else was happening, something beyond the normal operations of the cosmic infrastructure. "How long have you been here?" I asked, though time didn't mean much in these spaces. "I don't know. Hours? Days? It all blurs together. But I can feel my body somewhere else, in a hospital maybe. I can hear voices sometimes, my daughter crying, my mother praying. I'm not dead, but I'm not there either. I'm stuck." I pulled out the clipboard that had appeared on my belt the moment I'd signed the contract. It showed the manifest for my cargo, each ending carefully catalogued with its origin and destination. I found Catherine's entry, and it was different from the others. The text kept shifting, unable to settle on a classification. Status, undetermined. Origin, Highway 415, fog incident. Destination, pending review. Pending review. She was in limbo, literally. Caught between life and death because something had gone wrong with the collection. Maybe the fog on Highway 415 was more than natural fog. Maybe it was a boundary zone, a place where the infrastructure leaked into normal reality, and maybe Catherine had driven through at exactly the wrong moment, when the barriers were thin and the collection systems were active. "I can't just release you," I said, hating the words even as I spoke them. "There are rules, protocols. If I just let you go, I don't know what would happen. You might snap back to your body, or you might dissipate entirely, or you might end up somewhere worse than here." "Then what am I supposed to do?" she asked, and I could hear tears in her voice even though she had no physical form to cry with. just stay here forever? Be delivered to some cosmic filing cabinet? My daughter needs me. She's only 6. She can't lose her mother to a filing error. I thought about the route ahead. The archive of almost, where near misses and close calls were stored. Maybe that's exactly where Catherine needed to go. Not as cargo to be filed away, but as a case to be reviewed, a mistake to be corrected. The archive would have entities who could determine what she really was, whether she was meant to live or die, whether this was all some cosmic accounting error. Listen, I said, making a decision that probably violated 17 different protocols. I'm heading to the archive of almost. It's not a final destination, it's a sorting facility. They review edge cases, situations that don't fit the normal parameters. If anyone can figure out what happened to you and how to fix it, it's them. But you have to trust me, and you have to stay calm. The roads respond to emotional states. Too much fear or anger, and you could destabilize, become something neither living nor dead, but worse. She nodded, or at least the shimmer that was her presence moved in a way that suggested nodding. I'll try, but can you tell me about the outside? About normal things? It helps me remember who I am. I climbed back into my cab and started driving again, but I left the trailer doors slightly open, metaphysically speaking, so Catherine could hear me. As I drove through the sorrow zones toward the archive, I told her about the weather in Louisiana, about the Saints' latest season, about the new bridge they were building near Lake Charles. Normal, mundane things that anchored her to the reality she was trying to return to. The road began to change as we got closer to the archive. The sorrow faded, replaced by a feeling of possibility, of things that almost were. I could see shadows of events that had nearly happened, cars that had almost crashed but didn't, words that had almost been spoken, loves that had almost bloomed. The archive existed in the space between yes and no, between was and wasn't, the cosmic equivalent of a coin frozen in mid-flip. The building itself, when it finally appeared, was impossible to describe in three-dimensional terms. It existed in every architectural style simultaneously: Gothic cathedral, modern glass tower, ancient pyramid, and things that human architecture hadn't invented yet. The loading dock was more comprehensible, looking almost like a normal warehouse receiving area, if you ignored the fact that the other trucks unloading were from every era of transportation history and several eras that hadn't happened yet. I backed my trailer up to the dock, and beings that might have been angels or might have been bureaucrats or might have been both began unloading the cargo. They moved with efficiency that transcended physical motion, simply willing the crystallized endings from one location to another. When they got to Catherine, they stopped. One of them, wearing what looked like a business suit made of condensed mathematics, approached my cab. "Driver," it said in a voice like calculated probability, "you have an anomaly in your shipment." "I know," I said. "She's not supposed to be here. She's not dead. She needs review, maybe reversal." The being consulted something that might have been a clipboard, or might have been a tablet, or might have been a window into the fundamental code of reality. Catherine Thibodeau. Yes, we have been expecting this. She is the 7th such case this month from the Highway 415 anomaly zone. The infrastructure there has become porous. Living consciousness are being swept up with the dead. So you can send her back? It's not that simple. The being gestured, and suddenly I could see Catherine's situation in its full complexity. Her body was in a coma in Lafayette General, machines keeping it alive. Her consciousness was here, tagged as cargo, but there were also pieces of her scattered across 17 different probability streams. Versions where she died, versions where she never had the accident, versions where she became something else entirely. To return her, the being explained. We need to gather all these fragments, reassemble them, and create a singular timeline. It's delicate work. One mistake and she could end up spread across multiple realities, conscious in all of them, but complete in none. How long will it take? I asked, though I knew time was a meaningless concept here. 3 days in her timeline, 17 seconds in yours. 6 months in the bureaucratic timeline where the paperwork gets processed. But we will do it. The infrastructure may be hungry, but it's not cruel. We don't take what isn't offered, and Catherine Thibodeau hasn't offered herself to the roads. They took her then, that shimmer of consciousness that had traveled in my trailer, and I watched as they began the complex process of reassembly. They pulled in her fragments from across dimensions, each one a slightly different version of the same moment, and began weaving them together into a single thread that could be inserted back into the normal flow of causality. But as they worked, the being in the mathematics suit turned back to me. Driver, you should know something. The anomaly on Highway 415 is growing. More living consciousness will be swept up. More mistakes will be made. The infrastructure there needs repair, but that's beyond our department. Someone needs to drive that route, to patch the holes from the inside, to prevent more Catherine Thibodeaus from ending up in the cargo holds of reality. Someone like me? I asked, already knowing the answer. You have shown unusual sensitivity to the living among the dead. You recognized what she was when others might have just seen cargo. That makes you valuable for this kind of work. Specialized routes, we call them. Driving the broken roads, delivering the misfiles, correcting the errors that accumulate in any system this vast. I thought about it. I'd signed up to be a cosmic delivery driver, but this was something more. This was being a repair technician for reality itself, fixing the breaks in the infrastructure that separated life from death, making sure the boundaries held where they should. What happened to the driver of the abandoned truck? I asked. The one whose route I took over. Did he really reach the end of all roads? The being consulted its impossible clipboard again. Driver Marcus Fontenot. Served for 43 years. Delivered 17 million endings to their appropriate destinations. And yes, he reached the end of all roads, but perhaps not in the way you imagine. It gestured, and I saw a vision of Marcus Fontenot. Not dead, not alive, but transformed. He had become part of the infrastructure itself, not driving the roads, but becoming them. His consciousness spread across every highway that had ever existed, feeling every journey, every departure, every arrival. It wasn't death, and it wasn't life. It was something else, something that human language didn't have words for. That's the real end of all roads, the being explained. Not a destination, but a transformation. When a driver has carried enough cargo, delivered enough endings, corrected enough errors, they're offered the chance to become part of the system itself. To stop driving the roads and become the roads. Some accept. Others choose to simply fade, to finally rest. And a very few choose to return to mortality, to live out a normal human life with all the limitations that entails. And I'll have that choice. Eventually, every driver does. But not for a long time, Zebulon Arsenault. You have many roads to drive first, many deliveries to make, many errors to correct. Starting with the Highway 415. The anomaly there needs attention, and you're now qualified to provide it. They finished with Catherine then, her consciousness fully reassembled and ready for reinsertion into her timeline. I watched as they carefully packaged her, not as cargo now, but as precious freight being returned to its rightful place. She would wake up in the hospital, remember the accident as a dream, hold her daughter, and never know how close she'd come to being filed away in the cosmic bureaucracy. But before they sent her back, Her consciousness touched mine one last time. "Thank you," she said. And in those 2 words I felt the weight of every ending I'd delivered, every soul I'd transported, every journey that would never reach its intended destination. I'll never forget this, even if I can't remember it. And then she was gone, sent back to her life. Her daughter, her timeline where she recovered from the accident and lived another 40 years before taking her final ride on the cosmic highways. I knew this because I could see it now, could see the threads of causality spreading out from every decision, every delivery, every choice made on these impossible roads. I climbed back into my cab, the trailer now empty except for the weight of potential, ready for the next load. The GPS was already showing my new route. Highway 415, the anomaly zone, where the infrastructure was breaking down and the living were being confused with the dead. It would be dangerous work driving that boundary, patching the holes in reality. But someone had to do it, and I was someone now. Not just Zebulon Arsenault, failed trucker from Louisiana, but Ferryman 57, driver of the between roads, deliverer of endings, and now, apparently, repair technician for the cosmic infrastructure. As I pulled away from the archive of almost, heading back toward Louisiana and the broken section of Highway 415, I thought about the choice that waited for me at the end of all roads. Would I choose to become the infrastructure, spreading my consciousness across every highway ever dreamed? Would I choose to rest, to finally stop driving after centuries of deliveries? Or would I choose to return to mortality, to live a normal life knowing what I knew about the roads between? But that was a decision for future Zebulon, the one who would exist after countless deliveries and repairs. For now, I had work to do. The roads were calling, not with hunger this time, but with need. They needed someone who could tell the difference between the living and the dead, between those meant to be cargo and those accidentally swept up in the cosmic machinery. They needed someone who understood that the infrastructure wasn't just about processing endings, but about maintaining the boundaries that kept reality stable. I turned on the radio, and this time it wasn't jazz, but something else. The sound of every engine that had ever run, harmonizing into something that might have been music or might have been the heartbeat of the universe. My CB crackled to life, and I heard the voices of other drivers, other ferrymen, welcoming me to the specialized routes. "Ferryman 57, Deputy Guidry's voice came through, though I knew he was dimensions away, still recruiting new drivers at that impossible gas station. Heard you got promoted to boundary repair. Dangerous work, but necessary. The living and the dead aren't meant to mix, except in the proper channels. Keep them separated, keep the infrastructure intact, and maybe someday you'll understand why the roads exist at all." "Copy that," I responded, my voice steady despite everything. Ferryman 57 heading to Highway 415 Anomaly Zone, ready to begin repairs. And I was ready. As I drove back through the layers of reality toward Louisiana, toward that stretch of road where Catherine had been accidentally collected, I felt the weight of my new responsibility. I wasn't just delivering cargo anymore. I was maintaining the barrier between life and death, making sure the cosmic filing system didn't accidentally archive the living or release the dead. The abandoned truck I'd found was gone when I passed the spot where it had been parked. In its place was just a shimmer in the air, a scar in reality where something had crossed between worlds. I could see other scars now, other places where the infrastructure was weak. Highway 415 was riddled with them, like cosmic potholes that could swallow the unsuspecting. I pulled over at the first one, a tier, in reality, about 3 feet wide where I could see the normal world on one side and the collection systems on the other. Living people drove through it every day, unaware they were passing through a hole in existence. Most made it through fine, but some, like Catherine, got caught in the machinery. The repair kit materialized in my hands, tools that didn't exist in normal physics, made of compressed causality and crystallized probability. I began to work, stitching the tear closed with thread made from the forgotten dreams of dead truckers, sealing it with paste made from the final thoughts of those who'd died peacefully in their sleep. It was delicate work, requiring me to exist in both worlds simultaneously, one foot in life and one in death. As I worked, I felt them watching. The other drivers, the cosmic bureaucrats, the things that existed in the spaces between. I was being evaluated, tested, judged on my ability to maintain the boundaries. And beyond them all, I felt the presence of the roads themselves, ancient beyond measure, hungry but patient, needing their infrastructure maintained by those who understood the balance between movement and stillness, between journey and destination. It took me 3 hours subjective time, 7 minutes objective time, and 6 weeks administrative time to repair that first tear. When I was done, the scar was still visible to eyes like mine, but it was sealed. No more living souls would be swept up at that particular spot. Only 17 more tiers to go on this stretch of highway. As I moved to the next one, my CB crackled again. "Good work, rookie," Ferryman 19's voice came through. "You might just survive this job after all. Remember, the roads are patient, but they're also particular. One mistake, one wrong stitch, and you could unravel a whole section of reality. No pressure." I laughed, actually laughed, at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, Zebulon Arsenault, failed trucker, patching holes in reality on a haunted Louisiana highway, preventing the living from being filed with the dead, maintaining the cosmic infrastructure that kept existence organized. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but then again, I hadn't planned much of anything. The work continued through the night that wasn't night, in the place that wasn't quite Louisiana and wasn't quite elsewhere. Each tear I repaired made the next one easier to see, easier to understand. I was learning the language of the infrastructure, the grammar of the roads, the syntax of the boundaries between worlds. And somewhere in Lafayette General Hospital, Catherine Thibodeau was waking up, holding her daughter, returning to a life she didn't know she'd almost lost to a cosmic filing error. She would live, grow old, die properly when her time came, and maybe, just maybe, I'd be the one to deliver her ending to its proper destination when that time arrived. But that was a future delivery, a future story. For now, I had roads to repair, boundaries to maintain, and an eternity of highways ahead of me. The abandoned truck had been my invitation into this world, and now I was part of it, essential to its function, a small but necessary component in the vast machine that kept reality running. The radio played on, that harmony of engines from across all time, and I drove through the night, patching reality one tear at a time, keeping the living with the living and the dead with the dead, maintaining the infrastructure that everyone depended on, but no one knew existed. This was my route now, my purpose, my eternal destination, that was also a journey without end. And despite everything, despite the impossibility of it all, I was exactly where I needed to be.